Everyone thought Minato's flying RAIJIN was just an incredible jutsu. They were wrong. It was a bloodline limit, hidden within the Namikaze family all along. When Naruto awakens it as a child, speed stops being an advantage and becomes a weapon. One flash, one strike, and the battlefield is already over. They called Minato the Yellow Flash. Naruto is about to become something even faster. The Flash Fire, Chapter 16. Chunin Exam Stadium. Naruto held up a hand and said, "First round of the Chunin exams? Neji Hyuga, are you ready?" When Neji nodded, Naruto said, "Hinata Hyuga, are you ready?" Getting a second nod. Naruto's hand flashed down as he said, "Then you may begin." Naruto took a chakra-enhanced jump back as the two Hyugas stared at each other. Hinata automatically went into her stance, but Neji remained in a casual position. He frowned at the stance Hinata took since it was a little different than the gentle fist beginner stance, although it turns out he was frowning for another reason as well when he said, "Lady Hinata, a word of advice before we fight. You're not cut out to be a shinobi. You should forfeit." Hinata blinked, but before she could ask what her cousin was going on about, Neji continued, "You're all sweetness and light. A peacemaker, not a troublemaker. You're easily led, not a leader. And you have no self-confidence. You've got a world-class inferiority complex, so I know you'd have been more comfortable and content staying at the Genin level. But applicants for the higher-level Chunin selection exam must compete as a trio, and you couldn't bear to let your teammates down. The truth is, your participation has been reluctant from the start, hasn't it? You're the sheltered little baby of the main branch, aren't you? You have no self-confidence and everyone is forced to go out of their way to protect you. Face it, you are a failure and a failure always fails. A leopard doesn't change its spots, and your weak personality will never become strong." Hinata frowned as she thought, brave. "Yeah, Hinata?" her fighting spirit asked. "Let's show my cousin how wrong he is." "With pleasure." Hinata's coat flashed green before she blurred at Neji, whose eyes widened before he hastily deflected Hinata's palm strike from his chest, but wasn't ready for the foot that came and sent him skidding as Hinata connected with Neji's left ribs. As Neji skidded to the side, his eyes widened as he saw his cousin use the momentum of the kick to turn towards him even as she pushed off with her left foot. She landed right in front of Neji, who had stopped skidding, and launched a retaliatory strike at her chest only for Hinata's own palm strike that she had sent out as soon as her feet touched the ground to hit it exactly dead center. The hit should have jarred Hinata's shoulder, but she instantly bent her elbow and spun into Neji's guard and slammed her elbow into his face, blowing him back from the condensed chakra she had put into the strike that mimicked the Gale Palm Jutsu. As she turned to face her cousin again and fell back into her starting stance, Hinata's lips quirked as she said, "Tell me, Neji, if I didn't want to be here, then why didn't I drop out when I had the chance to during the preliminaries? Also, I think you'll find that I'm more of a tiger person than a leopard. As for never changing my spots, or in my case, stripes, people change them almost every day as new experiences change what define us." Neji growled as he got back to his feet and said, "Foolish philosophical talk from a person who tries to deny their fate. You are bound to lose today and remain a failure, Lady Hinata. That is your fate, and it shall always be your fate." Chuckling from their proctor caused Neji to snap his head over to Naruto as the blonde said, "Oh, you have no idea how wrong you are on that count." Neji opened his mouth to reply but suddenly found his mouth slammed shut as Hinata appeared in front of him and jumped up, sending her right chakra-coated foot crashing into Neji's chin. The force of Hinata's kick forced Neji's head back even as his body lifted to the same height, and Hinata took advantage of that fact as she slammed a chakra-infused palm strike into his stomach where the primary chakra coil started. Neji was sent flying back and landed hard on his back, while Hinata landed with the grace of a ballerina who had just performed a jump as part of her dance. Neji quickly got to his feet and used his chakra to unseal the tenketsu that Hinata's strike had closed. Growling at his cousin's apparent luck since neither had activated their Byakugan yet, he snarled out, "Congratulations, Lady Hinata. I thought you were too soft-hearted to take advantage of a person's distraction that way. But now it gets serious." Neji's Byakugan blazed into existence as he rushed his cousin, who settled into her own stance, and her coat suddenly turned yellow and markings that looked like spectacles appeared around her eyes. Neji briefly wondered what happened to his cousin, but put that thought to the side as he concentrated on beating her to a pulp. Those plans were put on hold by Hinata herself, though, as she began dancing around Neji's strikes almost before he could launch them. And to make things worse, she hadn't even activated her own Byakugan yet. Up in the stands, Hayashi sat next to his youngest daughter as well as other members of the Hyuga clan, including all of the Elder Council. Hayashi frowned as he saw his eldest daughter's coat change color, and markings appeared around her eyes. Is this her presence? I thought it was supposed to resemble a tiger, Hayashi thought. His frown lightened slightly as Hinata began dodging her cousin's attacks while making it seem easy as she did so, and without her Byakugan either. It seems that Uzumaki has trained her well, said Himobi, one of the eldest members of the council. The other elders nodded to the old woman's words, although another frowned and said, Still, an outsider training our clan heir for this match does not sit well with me. Nor with me, but we really had no choice, another elder said. Hanabi frowned as the elders talked to themselves. Back in her academy days, her sister had seemed so weak. But now, she seemed to be easily holding her own against her cousin who was called a prodigy. Perhaps she should ask this Uzumaki person for training when she finished learning the gentle fist style. It wouldn't hurt to get the same training as her sister. She was brought out of her thoughts when her sister's coat suddenly switched from yellow to green and Hinata went from dodging Niji's strikes to laying into him with a furious onslaught. Back in the arena, Hinata dodged a palm strike that was aimed for her shoulder and thought, I think we've got him mad enough, don't you? Yeah. Let's really put him to the test. No question about who had sent that thought. Hinata's coat switched colors from yellow to green and the markings around her eyes disappeared in favor for her activated Byakugan. Niji had a split second after the fact to take note of the changes before Hinata disengaged her resistance seal and shot at him with speeds that were easily double what she had been moving at in the beginning of the fight. As Hinata began landing blow after blow on his arms, Niji was forced to backpedal to keep her from hitting his chest. That only worked for about 20 seconds though, as Hinata suddenly seemed to disappear from his vision for a fraction of a second and he felt a painful strike land on his back. Gritting his teeth, Niji thought, I didn't want to show this so soon, but it seems I have no choice. I cannot believe she has forced me to use this. Niji suddenly began spinning, forcing chakra out of his tenketsu as he shouted, Rotation! A spinning dome of chakra that flickered due to his closed tenketsu shot out of his body, throwing Hinata back before she backflipped and landed on her feet, skidding. When she stopped, her eyes widened slightly at the sight of a very shallow but wide crater that had formed around her cousin. You learned rotation? Hinata asked with a raised eyebrow. She knew her cousin was a genius, so it didn't surprise her that he could. More like that, he was able to do it before he turned 15. Inside her head, knowledge was going into overdrive, trying to figure out how to get past the Hyuga's so-called ultimate defense. Niji had a smug smirk on his face as he unlocked his blocked tenketsu and said, Surprised that a lowly branch member could figure it out? This only proves that it is your fate to lose to me today. Up in the stands, all of the elders and Hayashi were stunned that Niji was able to learn a main branch technique seemingly by himself. Hinata, however, was more focused on getting through the technique than wondering how he learned it. You're going to have to slice through it. Your chakra wave jutsu should suffice if you sharpen the edge enough. Knowledge said. That could work, but I don't want to slice him to pieces as well. Hinata thought back. He would deserve it for all of this crap about fate he keeps throwing out of his mouth. Rude said before Hinata heard him shout in pain. We do not maim or otherwise do permanent and or major harm to family members, no matter how much they annoy us. We are better than that. That was Hinata's deadly sin aspect talking as it channeled her pride. Yeah, it's not nice, Happy said, adding her 2 cents. I say she just lets us out along with Whitey over here and we mess with his head a bit. Rage thought with an evil chuckle. Hinata cocked her head to the side as all of her aspects shouted, Yeah, Atori? Hinata asked. HM could work, and the others could use the exercise. Hey! Hinata winced at the 8 shouts but nodded her head and looked back at Niji, who was running towards her. The conversation in her head had taken a little under 10 seconds, but it seems that Niji was being a little impatient. Grinning, Hinata said, Hey Niji, want to know why I said I'm more of a tiger person? 9 tigers of different colors suddenly phased into existence in a row in front of Hinata, causing Niji's eyes to widen. He was so surprised that he didn't even notice that only one tiger wasn't semi-transparent. All 9 tigers grinned, even if one was timidly, before they opened their mouths and let loose with roars that shook the stadium. Rea o wearer. The roars of 9 fully grown tigers practically right in front of you is enough to make your ears ring, if not make you deaf. To make matters worse for Niji, a shockwave shot out of the pure white tiger's mouth, from where it was standing protectively in front of Hinata in the center of the line. The shockwave slammed into Niji and sent him flying a good 15 feet before he landed skidding as he held his ears. Up in the stands, everyone also had clapped their ears as the 9 simultaneous roars ripped through the air, making their eardrums rattle. In the Hyuga section, Hanabi was staring at the pure white tiger in shock since she had already noticed that it seemed more real than the other 8. She could hear the elders talking to themselves in an excited manner, while her father had an unidentifiable look on his face, as he studied the results of a month of training under someone who knew how to manifest the effects of their presence. Up in the Kage booth, Sarutobi had a grin on his face at the sight of 9 tigers standing in front of the Hyuga clan heir. From his right, Anoki gave a low whistle as he said, "That's some presence the girl has. And to think, it appears that one of those tigers is actually physically there as well." Indeed, being able to manipulate one's presence is an extremely rare and useful skill to have. I do not believe I have ever heard of a physical manifestation of someone's presence though, the Kazekage said as he leaned forward slightly in obvious interest. Sarutobi's grin grew as he said, "Indeed. She was trained by one of my best who knows how to use his own presence for the month, but I never imagined he would be able to do such a good job with the time constraints they had." Back in the arena, Niji was just getting up as he stared at the 9 tigers in front of him. His Byakugan clearly showed them being there, but he didn't see any chakra, so it wasn't a genjutsu. But because there was no chakra in them, his brain couldn't come to terms with the fact that they were actually there. He was brought out of his thoughts when Hinata allowed herself a grin as she said, "Have fun, guys." She received 4 grins in response as brave, knowledge, arrogance, and rage launched themselves from their positions in the line and ran at Niji. Niji prepared himself to defend but was momentarily caught off guard as the green and red tiger put on a burst of speed and rushed around him to form a circle before the 2 turned and in perfect synchronism with the yellow and lavender tigers rushed him from all 4 sides at once. As soon as they were in range, Niji started spinning, forming the chakra dome a second time. But to his surprise, all 4 tigers passed through the dome like it wasn't even there before they leapt at him. Niji's eyes widened, but then the tigers passed straight through him before landing on the opposite sides of where they started. Niji blinked before he started laughing. Looking at his cousin, he said, "This is the best you can do? I was actually worried for a moment, but this just makes it even more clear to me that you will never be nothing but a failure." Hinata rose an eyebrow while Atori began growling. Suddenly, the other 8 tigers seemed to phase out of existence, and his once pure white fur began flashing the 8 different colors as he reabsorbed the parts of Hinata's aspects that the girl had helped him manifest. His fur then shifted back to white as his eyes turned from regular storm gray to pupil-less lavender eyes, and the veins around said eyes suddenly bulged as a Byakugan blazed into existence. Niji had exactly 2 seconds to get over his shock before Atori let loose a roar, this time without the shockwave, and began running at him. Niji smirked and took a casual stance, obviously expecting this tiger to pass straight through him as well. What he hadn't noticed was that while the first 4 tigers hadn't left any footprints, the mass of fur, muscle, and teeth that was currently charging at him was leaving footprints with every step it took. Atori reached Niji's form in seconds, and he suddenly reared up and let loose with another roar as he swung his right front paw and slammed it into Niji's face, earning wide eyes from everyone in the stadium besides Naruto and Hinata as Niji was sent flying a good 25 feet away by the blow. He was lucky that Atori didn't use his claws, or else his face would be a mess of cuts right now instead of just having a massive bruise forming, and he would probably be short one eye as well. But Niji's problems weren't over as Hinata was suddenly right next to him with her leg raised parallel with her back and her foot coated in chakra. Hinata let loose with her axe kick, and Niji had to quickly roll to the side to avoid both it and contributing to the crater that formed when her foot hit the ground. Niji tried to strike at Hinata's legs from his position, only for Hinata to hop over the strike and slash her arm down. A thin laser-like beam of chakra suddenly shot out of her pointer finger, and Niji screamed in pain as the beam sliced along the arm, burning the skin. If Hinata hadn't toned the focus of the beam down, it would have gone straight through skin and bone. As it was, it left a large burn along the entire length of Niji's right arm. Hinata landed and dropped into a crouch as she slammed a chakra-infused palm into Niji's stomach, hitting one of the 10 pressure points that Naruto had told her about over the month, sending even more pain into Niji's form as he instinctively curled in on himself. When Niji was finally able to get over the pain, he felt a kunai resting against his jugular and saw the tiger standing over his form with its mouth open as if it was just waiting for the command to take a chunk out of his face. "Yield, Niji. You have lost this match," Hinata said calmly. Niji gritted his teeth before he rose his right hand and said, "Proctor, I forfeit." Naruto nodded and said, Niji Hyuga has forfeited. Therefore Hinata Hyuga is the winner. The crowd erupted in cheers as Hinata put away her kunai and held a hand out for Niji to take. Niji though scowled and swatted it away as he stood on his own and began making his way to the balcony where everyone else participating in the exams were. Hinata frowned before she said, "Niji, use this fight as a lesson. We make our own fates, and we're not bound to some predetermined destiny." Niji's form paused for the briefest of seconds before he kept moving, causing Hinata to sigh. By her side, Atori snorted and said, "That kid needs some serious therapy." Hinata shot Atori a look that obviously said she wasn't amused, and Atori quickly apologized before he phased out of existence. Naruto walked over and said in a low voice, "Well done, my apprentice." Hinata blushed as Naruto continued in a louder voice, "Now if you'd please head back to the balcony so that we can get the second fight done." Hinata nodded and began walking towards the tunnel her cousin had taken. As she did so, Naruto took his position in the center of the field and said, "Will Shino Aburame and Riko Uzumaki please come down for their fight?" Riko and Shino both turned from their spots on the balcony and began walking towards the stairs. Naruto only had to wait a minute before he saw both boys come walking out of the tunnel. As he waited, he looked up at the Kage booth and saw the three village leaders talking about the last match. Naruto smiled as he was able to read the words "likely" and promoted off of the Tsushikige's lips. If the leader of the village that was the Hidden Leaf's primary enemy during the last war thought one of their ninja did good, then that really said something about that person. Naruto just hoped that they were talking about Hinata. He brought his attention back to his immediate surroundings as Shino and Riko took their positions in front of him. Looking at the two, he saw that Shino was as stoic as ever while Riko was standing as tense as a coiled spring ready to be unleashed. Smirking at that thought, Naruto said, "Are you two ready?" Getting a nod and a monotone yes from Shino and another nod and a much more lively, "You know it?" From Riko, Naruto rose his hand and said, "Then second round, begin." Naruto slashed his hand down and took a chakra-laced jump to give the two some space for their fight. As soon as Naruto's hand fell down, sparks began appearing all over Riko's body as he said, "Just a friendly warning before we start. I wouldn't try to use your bugs to drain my chakra if I were you. I spent most of this month learning how to become a living bug zapper. I appreciate the warning, even if it is not very shinobi-like of you to do so," Shino said in a monotone voice as he adjusted his sunglasses. The slight insult seemed to just wash over Riko as the two continued to stare at each other for a moment before Riko took a huge chakra-laced jump back even as he blitzed through hand signs. Landing on the ground, he calmly said, "Lightning style. Lightning Kunai Jutsu." 8 kunai formed in his hands and he began throwing them one at a time at Shino, who took a single jump back before he began back flipping with one hand to avoid them. Think how he jumps backward in Naruto Storm Generation. It wasn't that hard since Riko was only making even more distance between the two than his jump had made. That became obvious to Shino as Riko began a long chain of hand seals before he stopped on the common lighting hand sign and said, "Lightning style. Lightning wave jutsu." The sparks around Riko's body suddenly began multiplying like crazy before a literal wave of electricity shot out of his body, expanding the further it went. By the time it reached Shino's form 30 feet away, the wave of electricity was easily 20 feet wide and 15 feet tall. The wave rushed at Shino at speeds no genin should be able to avoid. But before it could zap Shino into unconsciousness like Riko had optimistically hoped, Shino vanished in a whirlwind of beetles before he reappeared to Riko's right, breathing at a slightly faster pace than normal. Riko allowed the wave to sizzle out as he rose an eyebrow in appreciation and said, "You've learned how to shun Shin at our early age, and you've even managed to adapt it to better represent who you are. Well, color me impressed." "Thank you. I thought it prudent to learn this technique considering what you showed during the preliminaries, since I had no way of knowing if there would be sufficient objects to replace myself with," Shino replied in his usual stoic voice. Riko's head raised a bit along with his eyebrows as he hmed before his catars were suddenly out with wind circling around him before he spun in a circle while slashing first his right catar at Shino and then his left. As the blades were swung, the circling winds shot towards Shino's form like miniature horizontal tornado jutsu. The two wind vortexes rushed at Shino twice as fast as his lightning wave jutsu and slammed into Shino's body, only for said bug user to suddenly explode into hundreds of bugs that took to the air. Turning his head to look behind him, Riko said, "I have to say that I'm even more impressed that you could make a clone of yours form that far away from you and having it seem to be the real you by seeming to appear in a shunshin as well." Shino stepped out of the nearby woods that was part of their arena and said, Your observation skills are rather good. That clone was supposed to fool you for a bit longer. Rico met again before he shot at Shino's form with his catars already in position to hit him in the elbows. Shino quickly hopped backwards, not wanting to risk blocking with kunai since Rico was still sparking. He couldn't afford to be distracted by any kind of electrical shock. Rico followed his opponent into the woods before Shino was suddenly covered in smoke and a log dropped down to the ground. Damn. I just let him lead me to right where he wanted me to go, Rico thought as he looked around the woods trying to find his opponent. Not an easy task when the guy could make his coat blend in well with the surrounding bark of the tree by having his insects cover it in certain patterns. As he swiveled his head to search, Rico activated his catars splitting function and began coating them in wind, extending both their sharpness and reach. This would allow him to react faster to any threats as well as help make Shino think twice about trying to get close enough to engage him in close range. The sparks around him would keep the bugs away. Now he had a fly swatter for the human as well. He was brought from his musings as he heard the sound of metal flying through the air coming from both of his sides. Rico flicked his catars and sparks flew before the two kunai landed in the ground as Rico suddenly ducked to avoid the weighted end of a chain that had a 5-pound ball attached to the end. Looking at where the chain came from, he saw Shino holding the other end with rubber gloves on his hands. Rico rose an eyebrow and said, "Interesting weapon. I was under the impression that you Aburame don't use any weapons other than kunai since you rely mostly on your bugs to help. And why do you have rubber gloves with you? Are you planning on scrubbing the kitchen floor when you are done with this fight? It would not be wise to get close to you while you have those weapons of yours. So I learned how to use the chain during this month. As for the gloves, I always keep them with me in case I fight an opponent like you. Do not fool yourself into thinking that you are the first shinobi with the lightning element to think of constantly channeling it to keep our bugs at bay." Rico met at that before he said, "Yeah well, I bet I'm the first shinobi you'll see do this. Using this is way overkill. But it seems that he has counters for everything else, so I'm gonna have to do it to really put him on defense." Rico's catars were quickly sheathed as he began running through hand signs as he said, "There's a reason why I'm called the thunderstorm by my friends. That is true. What's not true is it's just because of my third element. It's because of my combining of the three." Stopping on one that was unfamiliar to the Aburame, Rico shouted, "Storm style. Raging Hurricane Jutsu." Rico's chakra skyrocketed as it became visible, making the whirlpool Nin look like he was in a blazing bonfire. The chakra then shot into the air and began spreading out as it began manipulating the air around it, drawing all of the moisture together to form storm clouds and also drawing all of the static electricity in the air into the clouds, causing them to spark. The clouds began spinning, merging into each other until there was just one mass of clouds that covered the arena with an eye forming in the center of the cloud mass. Up in the stands, Tsunami frowned as she thought, "Why are you using that technique, Rico? Do you really think you need the extra edge that comes with it?" In the participants' balcony, both Reina and Rachel sighed when they saw the clouds form beneath them as Rachel said, "There he goes again, blowing everything completely out of proportion." Reina frowned and said, "Yeah, but for him to go this far and use his ace, how frustrated is he with his opponent? I wish we could see what's happening in those woods properly. For him to use something like this in an exam, especially so soon, his opponent must be either really good or really frustrating. Or both. I've heard that the members of the Aburame clan are almost as good tacticians as the Nara clan," Rachel said. Most of the other participants looked at the two with incredulous looks at how casually they were talking about their teammate forming a typhoon out of thin air. Back in the woods, Shino frowned as he looked up at the clouds that had formed through the branches of the trees. Looking back down as lightning flashed inside the clouds, he said, "While it is certainly impressive that you can do so, I do not believe the situation you find yourself in requires the need to make an artificial hurricane. Unless you plan to use the rain that I am sure is to come and the lightning within to try and electrocute me. However, even that seems excessive." Rico grinned as the clouds suddenly started spinning faster, gaining speeds of a real Class 1 hurricane, and rain began to pour down as he said, "While it's true that you can use this jutsu that way, trying to be that accurate with the lightning is practically impossible without a level of chakra control that I am nowhere near possessing. So I'm going to keep the lightning in the clouds instead, where they can add to the storm's power. No, what I'm using this for is for the other two elements. Now let's see how you fight when even the weather is against you." As if Rico's words were the cue, the clouds began spinning even faster as the lightning inside added more heat. The rain began falling down in sheets that severely limited one's vision, and the wind picked up enough to make the trees groan as the storm's rotating force was kicked into high gear. Shino felt his feet beginning to leave the ground and quickly applied chakra to his feet to be kept from blowing away. That soon became a secondary worry, though, as Rico launched himself at Shino using the wind at his back to augment his speed. Shino could barely make out the vague form of his opponent as the rain hindered his sight, which was already hindered by his sunglasses. The fact that the wind made the rain almost literally dance in the air before it hit the ground wasn't helping either. When Rico rushed him, Shino had exactly 2 seconds to bring his chain up between both hands and block the sparking fist. However, this left him open to Rico's simultaneous kick that landed unhindered against Shino's right side, sending shocks of electricity through the bug user's body. The shocks were nowhere near lethal, but they did the job in making Shino lose his focus, and Rico began laying into Shino, causing him to be shocked even more times. Shino tried to fight back, but the rain made it hard to see and the wind hard to move. And his concentration was constantly broken by the small electrical shocks he was receiving. And the sound of the trees groaning as they were pushed around by the wind didn't help in that department either. Up in the stands, no one could see anything besides Naruto with a visible shell of chakra that surrounded him as he stood in the eye of the miniature hurricane with his eyes closed. Anyone who had worked with the blonde could recognize the signs of the blonde using his chakra viewing technique, since his chakra filled the entire eye, and most assumed that it went further underneath the clouds. There were murmurs as everyone commented on the glimpses of the storm they could see under the clouds at the opposite side of the eye that they were sitting, and the multiple flashes of lightning that continued going off in the clouds. The Kages were using the time to talk about if creating a hurricane could be seen as being too impatient or if it was a viable strategy if used right. 5 minutes later, there was finally a break from the lack of nothing to see as Naruto's chakra suddenly dissipated, and he took a step to the side as the battered and bruised form of Shino suddenly landed on the ground not 5 feet beside him and rolled once before he got to his legs, shakily trying to recover from the extremely strong kick that Rico had just landed on his chest. Said whirlpool Nin shot into the eye already in a jump before he slammed his fist into Shino's jaw, sending the aburame to the floor again. This time Shino remained unmoving and Rico sighed before he squeezed the water out of his hair. He then made 2 hand signs and everyone saw the storm begin to rapidly dissipate. Within a minute, the storm clouds were gone and the sun was shining into the arena, revealing that most of the trees had began to bend in sharp angles in one direction and a few of the thinner ones were actually cracked. There was also a large amount of small puddles spread throughout the arena. Naruto quickly took a few steps and crouched to check on the aburame. Seeing that he wasn't in need of emergency attention, he took a moment to observe the small electrical burns that covered his body. Rico wasn't messing around. Naruto thought before he stood back up and said, "Shino aburame is unconscious. Winner, Rico Uzumaki." The crowd cheered and Rico gave them a wave as he began walking to the tunnel. As he passed Naruto, the blonde said in a low voice, "A little extreme, don't you think?" Rico chid as he said, "The guy had counters for everything else I could use. I needed to be able to get close without him being able to counter properly." "So you used the storm," Naruto stated, already knowing everything that had happened in the woods. Rico nodded and continued on his way while the medics passed and began carrying Shino after him. Looking towards the participant balcony, he said, "Misumi Tsurugi, Rock Lee, will you two please come down for your match?" Everyone heard a "Yash, time to show my flames of youth," before a green blur shot out of the balcony and landed on the ground 50 feet from Naruto before it was suddenly beside the blonde and turned into Lee, who began doing stretches as he waited for his more sane opponent to take the normal way down. Naruto had to let a little chuckle out at Lee's enthusiasm as the two waited for Misumi to join them, which thankfully for Naruto's sake only took about a minute. Once both were in front of him, Naruto said, "Fighters ready?" "YOSH. No question of who said that." "Yes," Misumi said. Naruto nodded and slashed his hand down as he jumped back and said, "Third round begin." The fight, if you could call what happened next a fight, was short and brutal. Lee shot forward and slammed his fist into Misumi's chest. Misumi folded in on himself before he took a rising kick to his chin and was sent upward while Lee jumped after him. As soon as Misumi stopped rising, a flipping Lee was in front of him before he was hit by Lee's axe kick. The one without spandex slammed into the ground and created a half-foot deep crater with his impact. Lee landed and immediately took a ready stance even as Naruto appeared right next to his opponent, already in a crouch with his fingers checking his pulse. He was relieved to feel one, although when he saw Misumi's eyes, he figured the guy would be out for a while considering the hollow look in them. Standing back up, he said, "Misumi is unconscious. Winner, Lee. Medics." Hesitant clapping came from the audience as they tried to come to terms with the fact that the fight barely lasted 10 seconds. Lee meanwhile was running around like a chicken with his head cut off doing a victory dance as he shouted to his sensei that he did it and said sensei shouted back how proud he was of his students' flames of youth. Naruto gained a tick mark after this continued for a full 2 minutes, by which time the medics had already came and left with the unconscious Misumi. Using the big head jutsu that Irika had taught him, Naruto shouted, "Get off my field!" Lee eeped and ran in the direction of the tunnel that Naruto was pointing at. Scene change. Hidden Leaf Village Academy. Running track. Konohamaru's class was currently running laps around the academy's track while Irika watched them when they suddenly heard a far-off voice shout, "Get off my field," causing all of the kids to look in that direction wondering what was going on. Irika smirked as he recognized the volume of the shout and thought, "Ah, a true masterpiece of the art of getting people's attention. I was wondering when Naruto would use my jutsu." Scene change. Chunin Stadium. Naruto sighed as he passed a hand through his hair before he looked at where the rest of the exam takers were waiting for their turn and said, "Will Reina Uzumaki and Shikamaru please come down?" Up on the balcony, Shikamaru sighed and said, "Troublesome. Why do I have to fight a girl?" Reina frowned at Shikamaru and said, "Because we were randomly chosen to fight each other. Now get moving, sloth, or I'll throw you down there." The guy had proven to be extremely lazy and Reina wanted to teach the guy a lesson for complaining about having to fight a girl. Shikamaru sighed as he gave a muttered, "Troublesome." He then turned and began walking towards the nearby stairs. Reina walked right behind him to make sure he actually got in front of Naruto before the sun set. Once they were in front of him, Naruto said, "Fighters ready?" Reina nodded and said, "Yes." Shikamaru muttered a troublesome before he nodded as well. Naruto also nodded as he said, "Fourth round begin." Naruto disappeared, not wanting to be anywhere near Reina in case she decided to start things off with a metaphorical bang. His precautions were a good thing as Reina jumped back as she blitzed through hand signs before she shouted water style, "Thousand Needles Jutsu." When she landed, the water in the puddles surrounding her bulged before needles shot out of the puddles towards Shikamaru in a crossfire. Shikamaru cursed and instantly leapt back into a back flip as he began putting as much distance between him and those needles. As soon as he came out of the back flip, he did a handless cartwheel to the side before doing another back flip. He continued to do this as he made a zigzag pattern to the arena wall and then began flipping up it as the justice shot exactly 1,000 needles at him. The jutsu finally ran out when Shikamaru had reached a point about 5 feet from the top of the wall and had gone full circle around the rim. He was slightly panting since he hadn't expected the jutsu to last so long. It had easily shot 10 or 20 needles for the first few groups, but after that it had been just one needle after another. As soon as the jutsu ended, all of the water senbon suddenly dispersed and the water fell back to the ground. Shikamaru breathed a sigh of relief as he continued to catch his breath. Just dodging his opponent's opening jutsu had left him almost as tired as one of his teacher's evasion training sessions. The only difference was that Asuma used wind senbon instead of water and hadn't sent them all at him one after another without any breaks like that. Reina meanwhile was considering her situation as she looked up at the Nara clan heir. Thanks to her technique, there was no way Shikamaru's shadow could now reach her due to both the distance and the fact that he was on the part of the wall that the sun was shining fully on. As long as she was able to keep him at that distance, she should be fine. The problem with that was that she didn't have many long-range jutsu that she was confident would hit him without doing massive amounts of damage to the wall that could potentially harm the audience due to flying debris. As an Uzumaki, Reina was naturally a predominantly ninjutsu specialist. That meant that most of her jutsu were the kind you'd expect from a Jinchuriki since she had enough chakra to launch water dragons almost all day without getting tired. But she couldn't use such destructive techniques when they would tear huge chunks out of the wall even if they didn't miss their target. Reina sighed at her apparent lack of ability to use jutsu anymore before she reached into her kunai pouch. Up in the Kage booth, Inoki studied the situation with a critical eye as he said, "It was smart of her to drive the kid as far away from her as possible, but now she has to deal with that distance between them. I'm sure that she will figure out a way. After all, the Uzumakis and Bangal wouldn't have sent her team to the elemental nations if they weren't confident in each of their abilities," Sarutobi said. The two other Kages blinked before both turned to their counterpart, and Inoki said, "Bangal? I've never heard of a place called that before. Where is it? You make it sound like it's not part of the continent." Sarutobi chuckled and said, "That's because it's not. It's actually a port city on the continent to the east of US. Both Kages frowned as the Kazekage said, "There is another continent? I thought ours was the only one since it's a supercontinent." Sarutobi just chuckled and continued watching the fight. Reina meanwhile took out a scroll and unsealed what looked like a cross bow without the bowstring. Everyone began muttering to themselves, wondering what she was going to do with a weapon that didn't have one of the most important things that made it work. But then she pulled the tanto that she always kept strapped to her back over her right shoulder out and placed it into the slot where crossbow bolts usually went. Reina pushed down on the tanto and all of the shinobi in the arena heard a faint click as the tanto snapped into place in a hollowed-out hole. Shikamaru looked down at the girl, trying to figure out what the troublesome redhead was up to. He got his answer when a bow string of chakra suddenly stretched across the bow part of the weapon and stretched back. Once the weapon was cocked, a chakra image of Reina's tanto was suddenly in front of the bowstring, fully notched due to the odd indent in her tanto's handle. Then Reina took aim and fired, sending the chakra tanto flying at Shikamaru, who quickly had to dodge the speeding projectile that had easily triple the speed a thrown kunai should have. Shikamaru stared at the blade's hilt that was the only thing still visible. Then the chakra sword burst apart into chakra's more natural gas-like form and dispersed into the air, leaving a hole easily a foot deep. He was snapped out of his look of fascination and slight fear as Reina shouted, "Eyes up, Nara!" Shikamaru's head snapped back to Reina's form just in time to see her snap off 5 more shots within a second of each other, creating a nice spread with the first sword in the middle of a square that the other blades formed. Shikamaru cursed before he quickly jumped to the side and stuck to the wall again as the swords shot into the wall not 2 feet from him. Shikamaru cursed again as it became extremely obvious that he did not have enough maneuverability up here since he had to contend with gravity all the time. Up in the Kage booth, the Kazekage was looking at Reina's weapon in obvious interest as he said, "A very interesting weapon. Obviously it has seals to allow the weapon to make a bow string out of chakra, as well as chakra copies of her close-range weapon. And it appears that it has quite the penetration power as well. And if I'm not mistaken, she's using wind chakra for the ammunition as well," Inoki said. Reina meanwhile had cocked her weapon again and had began taking pot shots at Shikamaru while making sure that she kept him away from the shadows that were on the wall. This kept up for another 7 or 8 minutes before Reina appeared to get bored. She lowered her crossbow, making Shikamaru breathe a sigh of relief as he crouched before he saw her take out the scroll again and used another seal that held what looked like a small telescope. Rachel then attached the scope to the crossbow stock and then unsealed another attachment which extended said stock. Reina placed the stock against her shoulder so that she could look through the spyglass even as she pushed a button on the telescope. Shikamaru was confused at this before he noticed out of the bottom of his eyes a red dot that was just above his bent knee. Shikamaru's eyes widened before another chakra tanto nearly took his knee off. It would have too if he hadn't moved as soon as he saw the dot. Shikamaru cursed as this just got a lot harder since before Reina's aim was affected by the distance. Now she had a counter and was sniping him instead of just trying to get a lucky hit. To anybody who knew the Nara clan, it was obvious that Reina was keeping her opponent on his toes so that way he couldn't come up with a plan to fight her. It seemed to work for another 4 minutes before Shikamaru suddenly threw out 2 kunai with balls attached to their ends which exploded in bright light that mimicked 1,000 candles once the kunai were 30 feet away from him. Everyone's eyes snapped shut in pain, and when they could finally open their eyes again, they saw that Shikamaru had disappeared. Reina frowned when she saw that her opponent had managed to give her the slip. Looking at the opposite end of the wall showed that he wasn't there, preparing to use the wall's shadow to augment his own, which left the choices of either him being underground in order to get closer or in the forest that was on the same side as the dark wall, trying to come up with a plan. Reina sighed as she flicked a lever on the side of her crossbow that read single fire on the top, semi-automatic in the middle, and automatic on the bottom. "I hate having to use these. They're such a drain on my chakra." With her weapon on fully automatic, Reina aimed at one side of the woods and held down the trigger as her weapon began spitting out one tanto right after the other, not even bothering resetting the bowstring which had disappeared because a completely different launching system was being used thanks to seals. Reina swept the weapon across the woods, tearing it apart before she reached the end and flipped the weapon back to single fire and popped the tanto out of its slot before she broke the crossbow apart and put all of its parts into their proper seals. As she was doing this, most of the audience had their jaws on the floor as they all collectively thought, "What the hell?" Hearing people asking just what kind of weapon her niece was using, Tsunami chuckled and thought, the wonders of seals. Of course, being able to learn how firearms work certainly helped when Elder Thanos was making it for her. "I swear, that man could build a super laser that could destroy the moon if he wanted to. Good thing he's more of a professional gun expert than a mad scientist." Up in the Kage booth, Inoki and the Kazekage were drooling at such a weapon. Literally, Sarutobi could actually see the Kazekage's veil dampening. Chuckling, he said, "Impressive, isn't it? Too bad it's more greedy than an Akimichi who hasn't eaten for a week when it comes to using chakra in that mode." The two Kages looked at him as if he had just brutally murdered 1,000 puppies in front of them. But I want one," the Kazekage whimpered in a low voice that Sarutobi managed to still hear due to the fact that he was sitting next to him and had sharp ears. This caused Sarutobi to give a belly laugh before he said, "You'll have to ask their Jounin sensei if she can replicate it then. Although I doubt she'd agree considering who's asking and what's going to happen after all this." While the two foreign Kages were drooling like kids in a candy store, something which was widely copied by other ninja in the audience, including one weapon-using girl with buns in her hair, who had stars in her eyes and sparkles surrounding her head, as she drooled at the weapon. Reina had sheathed her tanto and was now going through hand signs before she stomped her foot on the ground and said, "Earth style. Earth's tremble jutsu." The earth jutsu took a lot more chakra since it wasn't one of her natural elements, but it could be said that the results were well worth it as the ground shook strongly once and cracks formed before the ground uplifted itself in huge chunks. Think of what Sakura did to uncover Kakashi during her and Naruto's fight against him in the beginning of Shippuden. Everyone saw Shikamaru, who was 10 feet behind Reina. Shikamaru cursed as Reina turned her head and gave an evil smirk as she said, "Gotcha." The last thing Shikamaru saw was a full-body resistance seal flaring before he had a fist in his stomach. As Shikamaru's unconscious form fell off of Reina's fist, Naruto appeared and said, "Shikamaru Nara is unconscious. Therefore Reina Uzumaki wins. We will now take a 10-minute break to repair the arena. Please use this time to visit the concession stands and bathroom as the next break won't be until after the last fight of the first round." Most of the audience began to stand up while others decided to remain seated as everyone talked about the fight so far. Meanwhile, Earth-style users came and began repairing the arena floor while the woods suddenly started repairing themselves as if there was someone out there using the fabled wood style. Wink, wink, the Kages began talking to themselves about the fight and whether or not using what counted in the elemental nations as a chakra-powered machine gun to mow down a forest to make sure your opponent wasn't there was a sound tactic or just overkill. As this was happening, Naruto walked with Reina towards the tunnel to let them work as he said, "You and your brother have been doing well so far." Reina gained a slight blush as she said, "Thank you, Naruto." The two then split up with Reina heading to the balcony and Naruto going to use the water fountain by the restrooms. 10 minutes later, the arena was back in its original condition and everyone was seated. Naruto appeared in the center of the arena drawing everyone's attention as he said, "The 5th round is about to start. Will Temari of the Desert and Tenten please come down for their fight? I swear to both Log and God that my brother actually chose those two to fight. Ironic, no? I ask my brother to pick the names since he never saw the show or read the manga and he picks a fight that actually happens." Temari used her fan to create a huge gust of wind that she rode on using her fan like a skyboard to the amazement of some of the crowd. Think snowboards only used by skydivers. They are used to both control the person's descent and to do more aerial tricks than a person with just a parachute. Tenten quickly followed her by jumping over the railing and taking ninja jumps to reach her spot in front of Naruto at the same time. As the two kunoichi stood in front of him, Naruto once again noticed that Tenten had 2 ninjatos strapped to her back. Probably wants them for quick draw purposes. I know I would if I was a weapons master and I knew for a month that my opponent was a long-range wind user. Naruto thought as he also noticed the 2 small fans in Temari's belt before he said, "Fighters ready?" "Yes," Temari said with a confident smirk. "Yes," Tenten said as her eyes instantly turned serious and her hands twitched. "Then let the 5th fight begin," Naruto shouted as he shot back. Tenten immediately rushed her opponent as her hands went to her swords and she pulled them out and performed a downward strike with the 2 in the same movement. A loud clang was heard as Temari quickly closed her fan and raised it to block the 2 swords. This became the pattern for most of the fight as Tenten began laying into Temari, trying to cut her to ribbons as Temari kept back-stepping while moving her heavy fan to keep the sharp and pointy toys of her opponent from piercing her flesh. As she was constantly pushed back, Temari thought, "Damn, she's not giving me a chance to use the smaller fans I bought over the month. Although with how she's attacking, I think they would be bent into circles if I tried blocking with them too much. I can already see the dents forming in Mom's battle fan." Temari was brought out of her thoughts as they reached the forest and Tenten unleashed a viscous kick against her fan which had the effect of slamming her into a tree. Hey, with Guy and Lee on her team, you know she had to get some kind of muscle. Temari gritted her teeth to keep herself from shouting in pain before she really did when Tenten bypassed her defenses and stabbed both blades into her opponent's hands. Temari instantly dropped the fan and an instant later found a blade on either side of her neck. Yield. I took care to avoid the bones in your hands, but I won't be so kind with my next strikes. Ten said as Temari noticed that instead of the blades pointing to her throat, they were instead pointed down towards her shoulders. She wanted to go for her smaller fans that were tucked in her belt but knew that her opponent would be faster in her threat. Sighing, she rose her hand and said, "Proctor, I yield." Naruto nodded and said, "Temari of the desert has forfeited. Therefore Ten wins." The crowd cheered as Ten sheathed her swords before she bent down and picked up Temari's fan. Taking out an empty sealing scroll, she sealed it before she handed it to her former opponent, much to Temari's shock, who was about to ask what the bun-haired girl thought she was doing. Taking the offered scroll with a muttered thanks, Temari pocketed the scroll before she walked over to the medics who had been coming to look at her hands. Ten nodded before she took off back to the balcony to watch the rest of the last two fights of the first round. That's how a weapon master should fight a wind type. Naruto waited until Temari and the medics had left the field as well before he walked back to his spot and said, "Will Kabuto Yakushi and Rachel Aliston please come down for their match? How I wish I was in Rachel's place. That traitor wouldn't know what hit him. I still can't figure out how he had left that meeting without me finding any trace of him. Or how he could have been in two places at once. We were sure that it was him who had controlled those dead bodies to take the Uchiha kid at the hospital. But without confirmed evidence we can't take him in for questioning. Still, I told Rachel this morning to hold nothing back, so she'll make him sweat at least." The two fighters turned from the balcony and made their way down. As they walked, Kabuto adjusted his glasses as he thought, "I'm glad I'm finally being allowed to actually finish an exam. With the destruction of the Leaf Village, there is really no more reason for me to hold myself back. Still, it's a good thing that no one can prove I was at that hospital since the body Kakashi captured wasn't really me. Too risky being caught myself after all. And with an airtight alibi of me being on the other side of the village at the time, they had to drop their investigation of me. Thank God for shadow clones." The two fighters finally reached Naruto and the two stood in front of each other. Kabuto had a smile that was both relaxing and arrogant. Rachel, meanwhile, had a look of sheer determination on her face. Naruto, for whatever reason, had told her to go all out on this person. She planned to make this match just one big bad experience for the medic Nin. Naruto looked between the two and said, "Fighters ready?" Getting nods from both, he said, "Sixth round, begin." Naruto's hand had barely begun its descent before Rachel was jumping backwards to avoid the chakra scalpel aimed for her neck. Rachel's eyes narrowed, and while she was still in midair, quickly drew one of her hook swords and tried to chop the offending limb off. Kabuto quickly withdrew his left hand even as his right came out with an actual scalpel that he pumped chakra into and used to push Rachel's sword upwards as he stepped into Rachel's guard, ready to shove the scalpel into the girl's chest. Rachel wasn't going to have it though, as her other hand came up and grabbed Kabuto's wrist and sparks flew from her hand, shocking Kabuto long enough for her to land and put some distance between the two. As she landed, Rachel gave Kabuto a deadpan look as he rubbed his wrist, applying medical chakra to get it back to 100%. Continuing to look at her opponent nonplussed, Rachel said, "You know, I always thought you medic Nin were supposed to be more cautious. What is that saying, medic Nin are the last ones hurt? Seems to me you aren't a very good medic if you just rush into fights like that." Kabuto scowled before both of his hands lit up with medical chakra and he charged at Rachel again. Rachel in turn took another jump back as she put her hook sword back in its sheath before she landed and began back flipping at a rapid pace away from Kabuto, who couldn't get close enough to use his scalpels. He followed her all the way to the arena wall, getting frustrated the longer Rachel continued to evade him. Then Rachel reached the wall and planted her feet against it before she pushed off as her whole arm sparked, and she slammed the arm into Kabuto's neck as she shouted, "Lariat!" Kabuto had exactly one split second for his eyes to widen before Rachel's arm crushed his windpipe and sent electricity coursing through his body. But then, to Rachel's confusion, the medic Nin grinned before he fell apart into clumps of mud. "Damn, mud clone. When did he make that?" Rachel asked herself as she quickly jumped back to the wall and began back flipping up so that way she wouldn't be on the arena floor if Kabuto was using the underground fish projection jutsu. Stopping at a height of 25 feet, Rachel considered her options. "Alright, I've got a medic Nin who is also an earth type. He can make mud clones, so it will be difficult to know if the one I'm fighting is the real one or not. I should use lightning style against him since lightning trumps earth. Since I can't see him anywhere, it is a good bet that he knows that underground fish projection jutsu. Whoever named it, that was an idiot. Rachel shook that thought away and thought, focus Rachel, you can take pot shots at idiots after you win. Now let's see. Best way to counter that jutsu is to either use the earth tremble jutsu like Reina did or to stream lightning through the ground. I'm pathetic at earth jutsu, so I guess I'll have to go with the latter. With plan in mind, Rachel took a chakra-enhanced leap off the wall and landed near the center of the arena. As soon as her feet touched ground, she dropped into a crouch and slammed her hands on the ground. Trails of lighting shot through the ground, crackling as Rachel focused on pushing her lightning-natured chakra through it, trying to draw out Kabuto. Rachel kept the electricity flowing for a minute before she cut it off with a frown. Being trained by Uzumaki's gives you some damn impressive chakra reserves, but she couldn't keep that up for too long. She was also frowning because Kabuto hadn't come flying out of the ground twitching, and it was too much to hope that he was still down there unable to come back up. Rachel's eyes snapped around the arena before they landed on the woods section. Sighing, she thought of course he wouldn't just come up where I could see him. Still, if he thinks I'm going in there after him, then he's crazy. Rachel began forming hand signs before she called out, lightning style. Lightning wolf pack jutsu. Static electricity crackled around Rachel's form before it expanded, and took the form of 5 growling wolves, drawing murmurs from most of the crowd. Still looking towards the woods, Rachel said, I want him alive. The wolves let loose with a collective howl that sent chills down most of the audience's spines before they charged into the woods. Reaching the edge of the woods, the wolves got out of their pack formation and split up in order to search better. As they slipped into the woods, Kabuto was leaning against a tree trying to get his limbs back into proper working order. Well now, I don't think I should use any more mud clones against her, Kabuto thought to himself as green chakra surrounded his arms as he tried to heal himself without using the mystical palm technique. It's not like he could use that when he couldn't even properly control his body's movements, so he was stuck pushing medical chakra through his coils by will alone like it was some kind of advanced chakra control exercise. I don't think I should try going underground either. Who would have thought she had enough chakra to send that much electricity through the ground? If she had controlled it a little bit better, I bet she could have made a net, Kabuto thought before he heard the crackling sound of electricity. Frowning, he looked around the tree he was leaning against and saw a wolf made out of electricity not 20 feet away. The wolf spotted him and seemed to grin as it raised its head and let loose with a howl. For other howls answered, and the wolf launched itself at Kabuto to keep him busy while its comrades came to help. Kabuto uttered a curse and dodged the mass of animated electricity by jumping away. The wolf shot past him before flipping in mid-air to slam all 4 paws against the tree it was heading towards and launched off at Kabuto's still airborne form, leaving burnt paw prints in the tree trunk. Kabuto let out another curse as he shot a chakra string to the side and pulled himself towards the tree that it connected to. The wolf shot past him with barely an inch to spare, and Kabuto felt his skin tingle from such close proximity to that much electrical current. Kabuto landed on the ground and warily watched his opponent land and turn around as the wolf growled at him. But just when he thought he might have a second to come up with a plan to get him a few more seconds before it jumped at him again, Kabuto suddenly screamed in pain as another wolf jumped through the tree that he had his back to and through his body, leaving that part of the tree scorched and Kabuto's body spasmodically twitching as sparks erupted all over his body. Kabuto's body crashed down onto the ground as it continued to involuntarily twitch for the second time that day. He glared at the wolf only for the wolf to place a paw on his leg, shocking him even more and getting a other scream of pain from the traitor. Back in the center of the arena, Rachel cocked her head and said, I didn't think they'd find him that soon. 10 minutes later, Kabuto was staring hatefully at the 5 wolves, who by that time had all met up and formed a circle around him. The reason why he was glaring was because the wolves were currently dragging him out of the woods by biting his clothes. Every time his body stopped twitching and he tried to get free, one of the wolves would move its muzzle just enough to shock him again. He had tried to substitute himself with the surrounding bits of trees a few times, but the wolves would always either catch him before he could get away or somehow sniff him out and shock him again if he ever appeared with trees blocking their view. In the stands, the civilian population that made a portion of the audience kept flinching as Kabuto kept screaming in pain due to the fact that he was determined not to let the pack of elemental wolves complete the mission that was given to them by their creator. After 12 minutes of hearing a scream of pain nearly every 2 minutes, the wolves finally came out of the woods, dragging Kabuto between them. The guy had massive burns all over his body since the last time he had tried to escape. The wolves apparently had enough, and all 5 had briefly rubbed against him, tearing his nerves apart and making them practically useless. For a normal person, it would take a medic of Tsunade's caliber to get the nerves even slightly repaired properly. For Kabuto, it was a really big nuisance since he had a regeneration bloodline that would heal him before the day was done. Still, He wouldn't be able to do his part of the plan as he was, and that infuriated him. Seeing that smug smirk on his opponent's face and the smaller one on the proctor's face only made him madder. When the wolves had finished dragging Kabuto to Rachel, they burst apart into showers of static sparks which quickly dissipated. Naruto walked over and took one look at Kabuto, appreciating the burns on the traitor's body before he calmly said, "Kabuto Yakushi is unable to battle. This match goes to Rachel Aliston." Applause rang throughout the arena as Kabuto was carted out by medics. Once Rachel had jumped back up to the balcony box, Naruto said, "Will Gaara of the Desert and Sasuke Uchiha please come down for their match?" The audience immediately began talking about the fight that they had all came to see. A vortex of sand immediately appeared on Naruto's right as Gaara wasted no time coming down for his fight. However, after a minute of waiting, there was no sign of the Uchiha, causing the noise level in the audience to increase as they wondered where the kid was. Naruto frowned and looked up to the Kage booth and signed a query in the village's sign language. Up in the Kage booth, the three village leaders frowned since, as far as they knew, Sasuke was nowhere near the arena and the crowd was going to be getting restless soon. Inoki had the biggest frown on his face as he said, "I don't know which would be worse. The riots from the crowd if that boy doesn't show up, or dealing with your son if he doesn't get his fight Kazekage. I've heard rumors about the kid and I don't like his chances of being understanding of the situation. I'm afraid I must agree with you on that one. We may have to postpone the match," the Kazekage said. Sarutobi cocked his head to the side a little, almost as if he was listening to something neither of the other leaders could hear before he said, "We will give him the standard 5 minutes to show, but no longer than that. If he cannot be bothered to come to the exam on time, then there is no point in making him a chunin." Both Kages nodded, although the Kazekage seemed reluctant. Sarutobi then saw Naruto ask him a question via sign language about what he wanted the blonde to do. Sarutobi signed back his answer and Naruto nodded before he said in his announcement voice, "Sasuke Uchiha has 4 minutes to appear before he automatically forfeits his fight and is disqualified from becoming a chunin." The noise level in the arena rose once more, but Naruto and Gaara ignored it. One so that he could stretch his senses out to find the kid, and the other ignoring it out of simple habit. As the two waited for Sasuke's arrival, Naruto's eyes flashed around the arena at speeds that made it look like they were still simply staring ahead. He spotted Haku positioned near the north entrance, standing by an umbu in his old Hunter Nin mask, which had been repainted with the symbol of the leaf. Naruto passed his gaze over him as quickly as it had landed on him before he continued observing the crowds in the stands going over the plan that they had set up. For minutes of tense anticipation passed and Naruto pulled out a pocket watch. Seeing 15 seconds until Sasuke was disqualified, he opened his mouth to speak when a whirlwind of leaves suddenly blew into existence to his left, drawing his attention. Naruto smirked as he said, "You're cutting it awfully close, don't you think, Uncle Kakashi?" From the whirlwind came a familiar voice as it said, "Hey, I got us here on time, didn't I?" There was a brief pause before the voice said, "We are on time, aren't we?" The whirlwind of leaves settled, revealing Kakashi and Sasuke standing close together, almost back to back. Kakashi's hand was halfway through the motion of dropping off of Sasuke's shoulder, showing that it was him who initiated the rapid travel jutsu. He had a concerned look on his face. Naruto snorted and said, "You had 15 seconds before Uchiha over there was disqualified. Now get off my field. These people want to see a fight and they're going to be pissed if they don't get one soon." Kakashi looked relieved before he nodded and wished his student good luck. Sasuke ned as he locked gazes with Gaara and took his place. As Kakashi disappeared in another whirlwind of leaves, Naruto said, "Now that both fighters are here, let the final match of the first round begin." "Begin!" Naruto's shout was met with all three people standing in the middle of the arena exploding into action. Naruto quickly joined the slipstream and ran to a spot 300 feet away before he slipped out and watched as Gaara's sand blasted out of its gourd and rushed to crush Sasuke, who in turn was already in motion himself, dashing to the side in order to avoid said sand, moving so fast that he was nothing but a blur to the eyes of civilians and genin. As soon as the sand was past him, Sasuke turned and blurred behind Gaara, launching a strong kick at Gaara's back. The kick was blocked by a wall of sand that Gaara had left in his gourd before said wall tried to close around Sasuke's foot and crush it. Sasuke quickly pulled his foot out and rushed to Gaara's side, trying to get a punch in, only to get the same results. Sasuke quickly darted away before Gaara's sand could try to attempt to catch him again. Taking a few shuriken out of his pouch as he ran, Sasuke used his lightning-natured chakra to give the shuriken a charge before he sent all three flying at speeds that would leave a civilian or genin wondering why they were suddenly dead. Gaara's sand reacted to the sparking shuriken and rose up, forming a sand clone which casually caught the shuriken. The clone grinned at Sasuke even though some of the sand was dropping to the ground due to the lightning chakra negating the earth chakra that made up most of Gaara's unconscious control of the sand. Then the clone threw the shuriken back at Sasuke, who quickly jumped to the side to avoid them. Sasuke ched to himself as he thought, I was hoping that my lightning-natured chakra would be more effective against his sand. Well, if I can't negate it that way, then let's try fire. Sasuke rushed through hand signs before he drew his head back and shouted, Fire style. Grand Fireball Jutsu. His head shot back forward and a large fireball blazed its way towards Gaara, getting bigger the farther it got from Sasuke until it was about 10 meters tall. The fireball slammed into Gaara's position with the redhead not even moving an inch as the fireball exploded as soon as it encompassed him. All of the civilians in the arena let out a collective gasp as the flames continued to burn for a full minute before finally dying down. When they did, everyone saw a dome of glass protecting Gaara, whose red hair could be seen inside. Sasuke tittered and thought, well, that was a bust. As if reading his opponent's mind, Gaara showed just how effective the fireball was as with a gesture of his hand the entire dome of glass exploded outwards before it drew in on itself and began spinning, forming a vortex of sharp glass that swirled around Gaara. Jinchuriki allowed a dark smirk to form on his face as he said, You are going to have to do better than that to prove my existence, Uchiha. Then he made another gesture and the top of the tornado bent until Sasuke could see the open end of the funnel. He then had exactly 1 second to curse and jump out of the way as all of the glass was fired at him single file with all the power and speed of a force for hurricane. The glass shards followed Sasuke all the way to the wall before finally running out, leaving Sasuke wondering just what it took to beat the runt who could apparently counter against both of his elements. Lightning wasn't very effective and fire just had the bust incombustible put in. Looks like he was going to have to use his ace in the hole after all. If only it wasn't before 5 minutes into the exam. Cursing under his breath about how everyone is going to think he's weak for having to use his new technique so soon, Sasuke began back flipping up the wall until he was only 2 feet from the rim. Gaara looked up at Sasuke and wondered what his opponent was going to do next to try and prove his existence. He got his answer as Sasuke ran through 3 hand seals and then clutched his left wrist with his right hand. For a second, nothing happened. But then Sasuke's hand erupted in sparks before a shell of lightning-natured chakra covered his entire hand with strands of lightning chakra shooting out at random directions. As the jutsu began growing in power, everyone in the audience began hearing a sound that could only be likened to a large room filled with 1,000 birds. Naruto stared at Sasuke's hand from his spot 300 feet away from Gaara and thought, now that's interesting. You surprise me, Uncle Kakashi. I never thought you would teach him your only original technique so soon. Although when you consider that Sasuke is now the only loyal member of our shinobi forces who can use it besides you, I shouldn't be so surprised. He was brought out of his thoughts by the sight of Sasuke blasting down the wall at high speed, carving a ditch in the wall as his jutsu augmented speed brought him back to ground level in little under a second. A small dust cloud erupted and briefly covered Sasuke's form before he blasted out of it and raced towards Gaara's position with his jutsu still carving a ditch through the ground. As soon as he was within 200 feet of Gaara, sand began whipping out at him, trying to catch him, even as Gaara's gourd burst apart into more sand which shot into the ground in front of him before a foot-thick wall of densely packed sand surrounded him on all sides. Sasuke dodged all of the sand tendrils with an ease that made it look easy thanks to his Sharingan, as he continued to rush Gaara's position, confident in the ability of his jutsu. That confidence seemed to be well grounded as Sasuke reached the wall and shoved his hand straight through it where his Sharingan told him his opponent had last been. Immediately after he penetrated the wall, all of the sand tendrils dropped straight to the ground, making Sasuke smirk at the assumption that he had just hit his opponent. That smirk dropped though as the sand wall fell apart to reveal his hand through a sand clone's chest. Sasuke had just a split second for his eyes to widen before all of the sand around him suddenly came to life again as it jumped up and smothered him in a cocoon. I expected more, Gaara said from where he was standing 10 feet behind where his clone was. Gaara rose his hand and said, Now prove my existence. Sand burial. The civilians in the crowd all gasped as the sand cocoon imploded on itself. However, instead of blood shooting out of the sand, there was only a popping sound and a poof of smoke. Gaara's eyes widened as he saw through the mist of sand his opponent standing next to Naruto. Sasuke had a panicked, wide-eyed look as he realized just how close he was to dying. Naruto though looked like he had nothing more on his mind than where the best place to cloud watch was. You would have never known that a shadow clone had just replaced the Uchiha heir unless you had caught him lazily making the necessary hand sign for one of the Hidden Leaf Village's most prized techniques. This fight's over. Gaara wins, Naruto said in a casual voice. Sasuke glared at Naruto and was about to shout at him when he was beaten to the punch by Gaara's yell. No, the fight continues. I will not let you deny my existence a second time. Naruto rose an eyebrow as sand shot towards Gaara even as he became covered in a gold-colored shroud of demonic chakra. Feathers began falling all around the arena as Naruto rose his right hand and purple flames appeared on his fingertips before he disappeared. Gaara's eyes widened as he folded over the blonde's hand and lost consciousness, as his access to demonic chakra was suddenly shut tight by having an odd-numbered seal placed over his even-numbered seal, which was always used to seal an odd-numbered tailed beast. As he did, enemy Nin dropped their disguises only for most of them to be dropped like sacks of potatoes as a ring of mirrors formed around the top of the seating area and a figure shot from mirror to mirror hitting everyone who had a sand or sound headband. The leaf shinobi in the arena were quick to pick off whatever enemies Haku missed. Unfortunately, they didn't get all of them right away. Gaara! Temari yelled out in fear for her brother as she and Kankoru rushed towards the two. Naruto looked to the side at the two who were in the process of jumping down to the arena floor and took out 2 kunai from his pouch, which he sent spinning end over end at the two. The 2 kunai reached them just as they landed but seemingly missed them by the barest of margins before swinging around the 2 sand shinobi and wrapping them in the chakra strings that had been connected to the middle of the throwing knives. Naruto made a fist and yanked on the strings, sending the 2 flying halfway to the center of the arena before suddenly stopping as Naruto intercepted their flight paths with half-fisted hands in their stomachs, knocking the 2 out as well. Naruto then spun around and thrust out his arm, sending a huge blast of wind out in a seal-less great breakthrough which slammed into the Sand Trio's Jounin sensei, who had tried to sneak up on the blonde. The man shot across the arena and impacted the far wall before falling over unconscious. Naruto turned his head to Sasuke, who had stood frozen during all this, and shouted, "Oi! Uchiha! Get your act together and go meet up with Uncle Kakashi for orders." Sasuke shook his head clear before jumping up into the arena seating to find his Jounin sensei. As he did, Naruto created 4 clones which quickly disappeared. An instant later, the Kazekage's kids and their Jounin sensei also disappeared as the clones took them to holding cells. They'd make good negotiation tools when this was all over. Naruto wasn't thinking about that though. As soon as he had made his clones, Naruto joined the slipstream and shot into the stands with 2 kunai in hand, ready to take down any of the shinobi that Haku wasn't able to put into a death trance on his first pass through. Scene change, village walls time, 10 seconds after Genjutsu. Jiraiya stood on top of the main gate's sentinel station. On either side of him was a shadow clone of his godson. Standing behind the 3 was Ibiki and a squad of Chunin with other Chunin squads standing along the rest of the wall with the occasional Jounin mixed in. There was suddenly a loud war cry coming from the woods before 3 large plumes of smoke erupted a quarter mile into the forest, with the middle one positioned just to the right of the main gate and the other 2 a half mile away from the middle in a triangle formation. The smoke cleared, revealing 3 snakes, with the middle one having 3 heads. The snakes hissed at the village that they were summoned in front of before they began slithering rapidly towards the wall with the intention of knocking giant holes into the village's primary defense. The 2 clones disappeared from Jiraiya's flanks and reappeared on the wall in front of the 2 flanking snakes' path. Pulling out a couple of chakra pills and a vial that held the original's blood, the 2 clones quickly popped the pills into their mouth before they opened the vials and splashed the blood on their hands. As soon as this was done, they jumped off the wall at the same time as Jiraiya did, and the 3 quickly ran through hand signs before they hit the ground and shouted, "Summoning Jutsu." 3 more plumes of smoke appeared in front of the walls before they cleared, revealing the big 3 of the Toad clan. The snakes all stopped their charge at the sight of the toads, who took a moment to look around before their gazes locked onto the snakes in front of them. Gamabunta took a moment to look upwards at Jiraiya, who was standing on his head, and said, "I see you weren't kidding about the chance to get enough snake skin to make wallets for all of the smaller toads, Jiraiya." Jiraiya chuckled and said, "I aim to please Bunta. Now if you'll excuse me, my godson is stealing all the fun." Indeed, as soon as the other 2 toads were summoned, the 2 clones had taken 2 kunai out of their kunai pouches and joined the slipstream heading into the forest. Already screams of fear were filling the forest as the enemy within the woods were suddenly dropping dead with no sign of who was doing the killing. Jiraiya hopped off of Gamabunta's head and made his way into the woods, as well followed by squads of Chunin with Jounin squad leaders, ready to make the invaders pay for attempting to invade their home. Gamabunta watched him go before he brought his attention back to the 3-headed snake in front of him. Drawing his tanto as he saw his two brothers leap to engage their own opponents, Gamabunta said, "Let's see how long you actually last, eh?" Scene change. Competitor's booth. Time. 5 seconds after Genjutsu start. Rico and his teammates narrowed their eyes as they saw feathers falling all throughout the arena. Sensing the Genjutsu trying to take hold, all three stalked the inner fires that was their chakra networks, turning them into roiling masses of chaos. The Genjutsu slipped off of them like water off of a duck's back, which is probably the only reason why they were fully aware instead of slightly muddled like the others in the booth who were still dispersing the Genjutsu the normal way. Which was why when a sound Chunnin rushed through the door to the booth expecting the Genin in it to only be just now getting over the Genjutsu or even passed out along the floor, he only had a split second for his eyes to widen before a wind-lengthened catter went straight through his head. Rico drew his wind-natured chakra back inside of him as his two teammates shot past on either side. The sound Nin behind the first had just enough time to draw a kunai to block Reina's tanto before Rachel's hook sword took off his hand and then his head. Rico was already over the two's heads as he activated his catter's splitting functions and slammed them into the third and final sound Nin's chest as he came down. Rico yanked the blades out of the dead Nin's body, allowing it to drop as he turned around to face the four-leaf Genin who were staring at the three in surprise. Rico frowned and said, "Why are you just standing there staring? Your village is under attack, people. Get your axe and gear and let's go." The members of Team 9 as well as Niji's cousin all unconsciously snapped into attention before they followed the whirlpool Nin who had turned around and began running down the hallway where the sounds of fighting had already started. As they did, the leaf Nin couldn't help but remember what had happened at the end of the first exam. Flashback. Ending of first Chunin exam. Slam. Everyone looked at Rico who had slammed his hand on the desk in front of him as he stood up and glared at Ibiki. Ibiki meanwhile stared right back at him with a frown on his face and his killing intent continuing to permeate the room. Rico snarled at the proctor as he said, Your dumb rules, and your pathetic attempt at killing intent don't scare me, Scarface. I don't care if I'm a Genin. Till the day I die, I'm still going to become the best shinobi of my clan and make everyone on this continent take notice of me. And if any of you wimps are still thinking about dropping out, then you should just turn in your headbands right now. Because you aren't shinobi, you're little kids trying to play it safe. We take risks every time we leave our villages. Why? Because it is our job to defend and support our homes, regardless of the risk involved. Now man up and show this jerk that we're not afraid of him or his stupid questions. The rest of the test takers all gained determined looks in their eyes and turned back to face Ibiki, silently telling him to give them the final question. In their seats in front of their teammate, Rachel and Reina smirked at each other across the 5 shinobi that separated them in their row. Their teammate always did have a way of having spectacular moments at just the right time. End flashback. A sand jounin came barreling down the stairs that led to the spectator stands from up above with a puppet in front of him. Rico let out a snort of disgust at the jounin and said, "What good is that little toy going to do for you? It doesn't even make a good shield." The sand Nin saw red, but before he could shout his anger at the whirlpool Nin, he heard a voice whisper behind him, "See." Then he saw nothing as Rico's catter pierced the back of his head. Rachel and Reina shot past him up the stairs, ignoring the piece of tile that was in the spot Rico had been. Rico pulled his blade out of his opponent and said to Team 9, "Go find your sensei. He'll tell you where you need to be." Team 9 nodded and dashed after Rico's teammates. Turning to Hinata, Rico said, "Stick close to me. We're going to cut a path straight through to Tsunami-sensei." Hinata nodded and the two tore up the stairs after the others. Scene change. Stadium Kage booth. Time, 30 seconds before invasion. The sound of chirping birds faded out as Sasuke was caught in a cocoon of sand. Seeing Naruto form a clone which quickly replaced itself with Sasuke before he could be killed, Inoki frowned and said, "I don't think that Uchiha Brat is ready for promotion. He was extremely late showing up with him appearing just in time for his match and apparently can't come up with a plan that doesn't include charging at his enemy at some point." Sarutobi sighed as he said, "I have to agree. Reports say that young Sasuke has a good backing in tactics, but he not really shown any of that today. What do you think, Kazekage?" Hearing nothing but silence as their answer, Inoki and Sarutobi turned and saw the Kazekage looking down at where Naruto was standing next to Sasuke with a look on his face of both disappointment and anger. The two Kages turned back to each other and gave subtle nods that the distracted Kazekage didn't catch. Inoki stood up and said, "I believe I will go relieve myself and place my next bets before the next round begins. Come along, Kuratsuchi." Kuratsuchi nodded and the two left the booth. The Kazekage's eyes flicked at his retreating back for the briefest of instants before they snapped back to the arena as he thought. It seems that Sasuke is not as strong as I thought. No matter, while it would be in my best interests to have a host be as strong as possible before I take it over, I can get Sasuke's body up to proper standards fast enough when I have him. But that can wait, for right now I need to begin the destruction of the leaf. I still cannot believe that Kabuto lost though. I will have to have words with him when this is over. The Kazekage made a quick hand sign and feathers began falling as his bodyguards rushed at Sarutobi's own bodyguard. Hayate drew his blade as he stepped in front of Sarutobi and slashed through both of the two Nin before he had to duck a kunai as the Kazekage launched himself at him. He was backhanded away as the Kage passed and grabbed Sarutobi before jumping up to the roof. Hayate got up from where he was slammed into the wall that acted as a backdrop for the Kage chairs and prepared to rush after the two Kages only to have to duck a second time as the Nin's body parts turned into four-sound shinobi, who quickly rushed at him in a feint with each of them throwing a kunai. The action cleared the four-sound Nin's path and they jumped after the two Kages and took positions forming a rectangle around the two Kages before they quickly raised a purple barrier. Hayate cursed and rushed after them. He was joined by a squad of ANBU who ran beside him. When they were 10 feet away, the ANBU captain suddenly recognized the barrier and shouted, "Stop! Jiraiya's barrier bashing seals can't break that." Hayate and 3 of the ANBU skidded to a stop, but the one in front who was in the process of taking a shinobi leap and to activate the Toad Sage's special seal couldn't stop his momentum as he launched his body at the barrier. The ANBU captain could only watch knowing that he was about to lose a squad member before the jumping ANBU was grabbed by the back of his collar and jerked back, causing his body to swing forward and his ninja sandals to barely brush the barrier. They erupted in flames, and as the ANBU's legs hit the ground, he quickly tore them off before looking at the person who had saved him. The figure was obviously one of Naruto's clones, since it had the Jounin's face and clothes, but it looked like it was around its early 20s instead of a 12-year-old. The gathered ANBU and Hayate blinked as the clone let go of the ANBU and then dropped his transformation that it had utilized to catch the ANBU in time. When the smoke cleared, the clone gave a quick salute and disappeared. "Well, that's something you don't see every day," Hayate said. The ANBU nodded and all 5 got ready for a long wait. Scene change. Hidden Leaf Village Academy time, 30 seconds after Genjutsu. Irika heard the village-wide invasion alarm start wailing and cursed as he shouted, "Everyone form up, follow me and don't lag behind. This is not a drill." The students who had been running laps quickly ran over to Irika and formed 2 lines like they were taught in drills. Irika made sure he had all of his class before he turned and prepared to lead his students into the building where there was a secret tunnel to the evacuation centers in the Hokage Mountain. But as he did, 12 shinobi with a music note on their headbands and wearing ski masks suddenly appeared in poofs of smoke 10 feet in front of him, causing him and the students to stop running. The sound shinobi in the front chuckled darkly as he said, "Well, looky what we have here. Some brats and their wimpy teacher out in the open with nowhere to run. You guys go on ahead. I'll take care of these weaklings." The other shinobi all gave dark chuckles as they turned to run to the academy. Irika gritted his teeth as he pulled out a kunai ready to defend his charges when a shout of "Like hell you will" suddenly filled the air, and all 12 Nin dropped with kunai holes in the back of their skulls. All of the kids let out horrified gasps as the bodies hit the floor. 4 blonde figures suddenly appeared in front of the bodies and Konohamaru shouted, "Boss!" Everyone could hear the surprise and relief in the Sandame's grandson's voice. The clones grinned at Konohamaru before the leader turned to Irika and said, "Our brothers are evacuating the rest of the school as we speak. We're going to start bringing your class to the evacuation point 4 at a time while 2 of us stay to guard the rest and then help with the rest of the village defense." Irika nodded and 2 of the clones disappeared as they joined the slipstream and grabbed 2 of the kids each and rushed to the Hokage Mountain. The rest of the kids woed before they all began disappearing in 10-second increments. Irika was the last one grabbed, and just before he disappeared after his students, he thought, whoever planned this invasion has made a big mistake. Then he was gone from the training field, the last person evacuated from the academy, leaving the building and surrounding training fields devoid of all life. Scene change. Hidden Leaf Hospital. 12 squads of Sound and San Nin were standing on the building that stood directly in front of the hospital's low 4-foot wall. All of them were looking down at the entrance where a single blonde figure was leaning against the wall next to the right side of the double doors. The figure was looking up at all 48 enemies with a look of absolute boredom on his face as he spun a kunai around each pointer finger in opposite directions. Only one shinobi for the entire outside perimeter of a hospital? No wonder Lord Orochimaru believes this village will fall easily. What arrogance. One of the sound Nin muttered to their leader. The leader frowned and said, either the village is extremely stupid thinking that no one will actually attack a hospital, or the higher-ups are really confident in this guy's skills. The man next to him snorted and said, overconfident you mean? How can one person completely defend the outside of a building like this, especially a runt like that brat? By being extremely fast. All of the ninja stiffened at the voice and looked behind them. Their eyes widened before all of them fell to the ground dead with through holes in their chest, in both of their lungs and their hearts. The clone cleaned his kunai on the clothes of the closest sand Nin before he went back to his post. Scene change. Kage booth rooftop time. 45 seconds after Jinjutsu. Inside the barrier, Orochimaru had a hand around Sarutobi's neck and the other holding a kunai close to Sarutobi's chest. Orochimaru let out a happy sigh as he said, "Ah, I've been waiting a long time for this." You've been waiting to build a village of your own, only to waste the lives of everyone who look to you for guidance and protection as they participate in a suicide battle alongside the sand? Sarutobi asked with a growl in his voice. You did not need to know Sarutobi well to see that he was beyond pissed at the waste of lives that Orochimaru was bringing about today. Orochimaru laughed as he said, "This village will burn one way or another, sensei. Whether it be from my army crushing this village like the leaf it's named after, or by myself once I finally kill you today. Either way is perfectly fine by me." "Too bad I'm not going to let you," Sarutobi growled before he seemed to burst apart in an explosion of wind as he used the body flicker technique to move at high speed out of Orochimaru's grasp and to a spot 30 feet to Orochimaru's right. Orochimaru blinked as he looked over his shoulder at where his sensei had stopped. Turning to face him with a frown on his face, he said, "That was not your usual Shunshin sensei." Sarutobi grinned as he said, "Actually it is, even though I rarely use it anymore. Oh, and by the way, I'm not your sensei." Sarutobi suddenly exploded in smoke before a whirlwind of wind blew it away, revealing a figure in a sleeveless shirt that made Orochimaru's eyes bulge out. Scene change. Hidden Leaf Village War Room. Sarutobi took off the radio headset that he had been wearing and walked over to the map of the village and its surrounding area that his Jounin commander, Shikakanara, was looking around as the other two members of the original Inoshikacho team waited for orders. Stepping up to one of the best tactical minds in the village, Sarutobi said, "How is it going?" "Everything is running smoothly, Lord Hokage. Naruto's clones have already evacuated the academy, and the Toad summons have already defeated the 3 snakes that were summoned. Everywhere around the village we're holding this village off easily with the help of Naruto's clone squads." Sarutobi nodded and said, "Good. Shikaku, I want you and your team to join me. We're gonna go help speed things up a bit." The 3 Jounin nodded and followed Sarutobi as he left the war room, leaving the coordination of the fights to the people who actually worked in the war room for a living. On their way out, they grabbed 4 radios that were already set to the proper battle frequency. It wouldn't do for the village leader not to know what was going on while he was fighting after all. Scene change. Arena roof. Naruto had to smirk at the gobsmacked look on Orochimaru's face as he pulled the small radio bud out of his ear. That look quickly turned to one of anger as Orochimaru shouted, Where is Sarutobi-sensei?" Naruto shrugged and said, "Somewhere out in the village where he can help more than in here, I imagine. My turn for a question. How are you able to move around so easily? Those 4th-degree burns I placed on your arms and upper body should have made it impossible for you to use your upper body at all." Orochimaru let out a chilling laugh as he said, "Wouldn't you like to know, brat?" Then his face turned serious as he said in a low tone, almost as if he was talking to himself, "I was planning on Kabuto summoning her, but since he is currently indisposed, I'll just bring her here as well." Naruto frowned and said, "What the hell are you muttering about, you traitorous snake?" Orochimaru grinned before he pulled a piece of paper with a seal out of his pocket. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he recognized the seal as one that allowed a person to use a jutsu without hand signs but looked far more complex than anything his godfather had shown him so far. But before he could even think about trying to analyze the seal, it glowed blue almost as soon as the entire paper hit open air. It was as if the mixture of gases in the air was activating the seal. Before Naruto could figure out how that worked, coffins suddenly burst out of the roof and Naruto's eyes narrowed in confusion at the numbers and whirlpool symbol that were on the front. Then the coffin lids fell forward and hit the roof tiles with resounding thuds, and his eyes widened at the 4 figures who slowly walked out. His eyes locked onto Orochimaru's own eyes, which showed the ultimate level of smugness, and growled as he said, "You slimy no-good grave-robbing motherfucking bastard. When I get through with you, there won't be a shred of usable DNA left to make even a tentative ID of your body." Orochimaru tilted his back and laughed before he gave Naruto the slimiest smile in the history of the world as he said, "Oh, come now, brat. Appreciate the large amount of work it took to get DNA samples for these people. How about I appreciate all the plans I now have of turning your entire world into nothing but pain before I finally end your existence?" Naruto asked in a deadly voice. "This is bad," the ANBU captain said from where he and his squad plus Hayate were watching the confrontation taking place outside the barrier. "Sir, who are those two people next to the Yondaime and the Red Death? I don't recognize them at all," the newest member of the ANBU squad asked. "The first and second Hokage," Hayate said, answering for the squad leader. "Young Uzumaki is good, but how can he possibly stand up to 3 of the past Hokages and his mother?" Said Hokages were looking around while Minato, Namikaze, and Kushina Uzumaki had their gazes on the blonde in front of them with what could only be horror in their eyes. "Well now, this is certainly a change from the norm. It seems we were summoned back into the world of the living. And by such a sapling as well," Hashirama Senju said as his gaze took in his surroundings, including the man standing behind him. "Indeed, brother. Although to have my own jutsu used to bring us here is quite unsettling. And to have us fight a boy of all things just screams overkill," Tobirama said as his gaze quickly darted towards Orochimaru before they focused on Naruto, whose own eyes quickly flicked over to the first 2 Hokages before flicking back to his parents. "Naruto, is that you?" Kushina asked in a horrified whisper. "Hey mom, bet you were hoping to not see me for a lot longer, eh? And I wasn't expecting to see you until even longer, dad. Something about your soul being eaten by the Shinigami as a price for sealing QB in me?" Naruto asked with a sad smile on his face. All 4 ANBU's jaws dropped past the bottom of their masks as the similarities between the 2 blondes was suddenly shown to be more than just similarities between distant relatives like most of the village had forced themselves to believe. Hayate's eyes were almost out of his skull as he too realized that the village's resident Jinchuriki was directly related to the man who had made him what he was. Orochimaru himself stiffened in shock at the new information, since he himself thought that Naruto was only a nephew to the 4th Hokage. He gained an even more evil grin as Minato sighed and said, "Orochimaru made a deal with the Shinigami. He allowed Orochimaru to summon me to take part against the invasion, and in turn, he got all of the souls of the people who died today, whether they be leaf, sound, or sand." Naruto's hair began moving around as if in a breeze as he said, "Well then, it's a good thing only those from the sound and sand are going to die today. My clones are making sure of that." 3 clones suddenly poofed into existence as Naruto's hair began moving around even faster and his body began being covered by a thin multicolored shell of chakra that moved in a boiling rage that reflected his anger. Then an instant later, Naruto's presence fully flared into existence and everyone in the arena paused in their fights as they felt like they were suddenly dropped in the middle of the ocean with it and the sky in the middle of a war with each other. Tsunami's head snapped over to the barrier as she thought, "This presence. I haven't felt a presence so powerful since Master Umi killed that gang leader who dared to say he'd rape his wife when he was done with him. What could have set off Naruto so much?" Kushina's eyes gained a proud look in them, but before she could say something, Orochimaru said, "Well now, it seems that the talking is over. Now if you 4 would please kill this annoyance, then I will be able to get on to the important stuff like killing Sensei." Right after he finished speaking, Naruto saw all 4 stiffen before their eyes became dull. As his father began pulling out a set of tri-pronged kunai and his mother reached up to the sword that poked over his right shoulder, Naruto's clones' right arms suddenly shot to the side as they snapped their fingers. Sparks were instantly created from the friction, and the blonde's arms became coated in swirling twisters of fire as the sparks ignited spinning funnels of wind chakra that surrounded their arms. The original's multicolored chakra shell settled down, leaving just a thin sheen as he prepared to move at his fastest possible speed. "Leave Dad to me," was the only thing the original said before all 4 joined the slipstream and rushed at their opponents. Clone 1 versus Hashirama. Naruto's clone shot right at Hashirama before he jumped and slammed a lariat into the first Hokage's throat, going clean through and leaving flames licking at the top of the torso and bottom of the head. Naruto's clone landed and looked at the body as it collapsed and the head hit the ground with a wet thud sound. "Well, that was easy," the clone said before the body burst into dust and shot at the head, lifting it up as the body reformed. "Or not," he said, now frowning. As the first Hokage's body continued to slowly reform, the clone crossed the 2 feet separating them and placed his hand on the head. The head began to catch on fire before the clone shot wind chakra into it, causing the fire to roar into an inferno. The head and body disintegrated back into dust as the seal inside the Hokage's head was burnt to ash. Naruto's clone turned to help with the other fights before he felt a hand on his shoulder. Spinning around expecting to have to fight some more, the clone gaped at the astral figure hanging in front of him. Hashirama's soul grinned as he said, "Thanks, sapling." Then it faded out of existence, causing the clone to blink before it shook its head and went to help his brother clone that was fighting the original's mother. Clone 2 versus Tobirama. Naruto's second clone wasn't planning on dawdling during his fight. If the original's memories of his fight with Kuroda were any indication, his brother fighting Kushina would need some serious backup, especially considering the fact that they didn't have a massive dome of ice to freeze the reanimated Uzumaki in. He appeared right in the second Hokage's face with his hand already through the undead's heart. The zombie didn't even twitch as the clone put a hand on its shoulder and pushed it away and pulled his other hand out in the same motion. It just fell to the floor. With his own fight taken care of, the clone turned and began walking towards his brother's fight, taking note of how his soon-to-be second opponent was fighting. Then he caught sight of his opponent's upper torso rising thanks to the chakra field that the original had started before the fights had even begun, and casually sidestepped the rock splitter jutsu that was aimed at his head. Turning back around and seeing the wound begin healing, the clone said, "So one instant kill spot won't do the job, eh? What about all 8 at the same time?" The clone joined the slipstream and rushed back at the former Hokage, which had taken the time the clone had spent talking to get back up. It fell down again though when the clone stabbed a wind sword through the throat, spinal column, lungs, liver, the jugular vein, the subclavian artery, kidney, and finally the heart for a second time. Then, for good measure, the clone spun the wind sword in his hand and stabbed the blade straight down into the zombie's brain. The figure burst apart into dust, and the clone saw that he had stabbed some kind of seal that had been somehow buried in the brain. Picking up the remains of the seal and looking at it in curiosity, the clone suddenly jumped as a voice said, "That's what you need to aim for to stop the others." Looking up, the clone's mouth dropped as the astral form of the zombie he just killed gave a merry wave before he faded away. The clone frowned as he looked back at the seal before he saw his brother run towards Kushina and his other brothers fight. Dropping the seal as he joined his first brother, he thought, "This should be interesting." Clone 3 versus Kushina. The final clone rushed at Kushina hoping to take her out before she got her sword out. The fight would be a lot harder if he had to fight an opponent with a blade in her hands. No such luck. As soon as one of the mimicries of life had disappeared from most people's vision, the other became coated in multicolored chakra and yanked the sword out and easily blocked the kunai stab to the head with the flat of her blade. The clone grit his teeth and shot his still flaming right hand forward even as he dropped his kunai a couple of inches in an attempt to get it under the sword's edge and swing it way out of position. Again, no such luck as Kushina's other arm shot out and nearly took him out of the fight right then and there as he quickly spun out of the way. The clone dismissed the swirling vortex of fire around his arm in favor of using the hand to push off of Kushina's shoulder to add to the power of his jump backward, which saved him from the blade of Kushina's sword that had not been idle when Kushina had tried to slam her other hand into him. Hitting the ground 10 feet away, the clone dropped his kunai and blitzed through hand signs and shouted wind style, "Wine Senbon Jutsu." The clone took in a deep breath before he let it all out in one massive exhale, sending 100 invisible and very sharp pointy things at his zombie opponent. Said zombie spun to the side and let loose with a horizontal swing of her sword, which sent a blast of wind towards Naruto, which blew the Senbon away before blowing past where the clone had once been. The clone saw the wind erupt into flames as it hit the barrier even as he ran parallel to said barrier for 5 steps before he pulled out 2 other kunai as he thought, well, jutsu are out. They just take too long to reach us. Old school style it is then. The clone dashed at his stationary target, ready to begin another dangerous game of try to poke the other person without getting poked yourself. As he did, the clone found himself wondering just how Kushina and Kuroda could have gotten their eyesight so good that they could keep up with those who could join the slipstream. That thought was immediately shelved as soon as it formed in favor of the clone going into a baseball slide less than 2 feet from his opponent, hoping to knock the zombie down since it couldn't move its legs properly with the multicolored chakra. Kushina, however, simply jumped over the sliding tackle while bringing her sword down on the clone. The clone quickly blocked with his right kunai even as he slapped his left hand on the ground, lifting his body up in a spin which he used to get level with Kushina's feet again and slashed straight through her right leg with the wind blade formed on the left kunai. He then pushed off to avoid the follow-up swing from Kushina's sword even as the right leg fell to the ground. Coming out of his spin and landing on all fours 5 feet away, the clone saw Kushina land and instantly go down. He was just about to launch himself at Kushina, while she was still down when a chain of multicolored chakra shot out of Kushina's chest, and the clone had to quickly duck and roll to avoid having its head cut off. He ended up rolling right next to one of his brother's feet as the other jumped over the chain and let loose with a miniature wind dragon. Kushina rolled to avoid the dragon even as her cut-off leg burst into dust and returned to her body to slowly reform. The dragon left a crater in the roof, revealing the fact that the purple barrier surrounding them also went through the roof as well. Clone 1 sent a burst of wind chakra out of his hands, launching himself at Kushina, hoping to get her while she was still on the floor, only to have to do the same thing to avoid the vertical sword swing sent his way. "We need to take out the head. There's a seal in it that's controlling her," Clone 2 said to his brother, who was now on his feet again. Clone 3 nodded and said, "Jutsu are out, they just take too long to reach our opponent in this kind of fight." Clone 2 frowned and said, "Or maybe you're just not using them right." Clone 3 looked at his brother in confusion as he began running through a quick chain of improvised hand signs. They weren't anything the clone recognized, although it seemed similar to the water condensation jutsu Reina used in the preliminaries. But it was extremely different at the same time, seeming to be a condensation jutsu for the air instead of water. "I'm going to have to thank Rachel for showing the boss her Fullmetal Alchemist manga after this," Clone 2 said as the air around Kushina began becoming wavy and mostly invisible tendrils began to rapidly snake toward different points along the barrier. Clone 3 suddenly knew what his brother was planning and beat his brother in warning their other one as he shouted to Clone 1, "Brother, get out of there." Clone 1 looked over from where he currently had Kushina's sword caught in an X-guard with both kunai and one foot raised blocking a kick. He saw the streams of changed air hit the barrier and instantly catch fire, and his eyes widened as he shouted, "Whoa!" Clone 1 jumped out of the way and all three clones watched as 6 streams of fire shot down the paths of changed air almost as fast as they could run and slam into Kushina's form, turning it into a raging bonfire. Clone 1 appeared next to his brothers and said, "Thanks for the warning." Clone 3 gave a nod and said, "No problem. You think that did the trick?" "No way in all 9 circles of hell," Clone 2 said as he ran through more hand signs as the burning figure silently turned towards them and began walking in their direction. They could see the body in constant flux as it tried to regenerate and the regenerated flesh being burned again. Finishing on Rooster, Clone 2 said, "Let's make that fire a little hotter." Wind style, Demon Windmill Shuriken Jutsu. The clone thrust his hand to the side and a demon windmill shuriken made out of wind formed in his hands. Both of his brothers jumped out of the way as he began spinning it around his hand, creating a screeching bell-like sound. Then the clone spun around in a full circle and hurled the shuriken at their opponent. As the shrieking disk of wind chakra shot at her reanimated corpse, Kushina's sword came up and slashed straight trough the shuriken. Said weapon burst apart into a massive burst of wind that made the fire erupt into white-hot flames. The 3 clones watched as the body finally completely burned away, leaving nothing left but the smallest of ashes. "That's how you really kill a zombie, you burn it to nothing," Clone 2 said as he crossed his arms in front of him. His 2 brothers could only nod as Clone 1 thought Boss and Haku had so much trouble with Kuroda. "I guess this just shows you that a dead opponent, even an undead one, is no match for the living equivalent." An astral projection of Kushina slowly rose out of the flames, and she smiled as she said, "Well done, boys. You make a mother proud." Kushina's face turned serious as she said, "Now go take care of your father and then make that traitorous snake pay." The clones gave a salute to the woman as she faded away before they turned and launched themselves into the fight between the original and his other maker. Original versus Minato. The instant Minato started throwing kunai in a spread, as he rushed at his son Naruto was throwing out his own kunai, knocking those off their course, making sure that there wasn't a proper chakra field for his father's corpse to properly use. Fortunately for him, Naruto didn't need any special kunai as his own chakra field had been slowly filing the area inside the barrier ever since Orochimaru had caught him. When he had revealed who he really was, he had turned the slight chakra mist that had formed into the invisible fog that he was used to working with. His father, not so much. Naruto easily sidestepped the punch that was thrown at him and grabbed the fist as it passed by, pulling it forward, causing the zombie to stumble before Naruto's churka-packed kick to the back sent the clone flying 10 feet away. The clone tucked and rolled and turned around faster than most opponents could take advantage of his ill placement, but Naruto already was on top of him with a kunai slamming against the tri-pronged kunai his father had grabbed during his roll. Grinning as he poured wind chakra into his kunai, Naruto said, "Like I'm going to let you actually use one of those." The kunai sheared straight through the blade juncture of the custom kunai of his opponent and sliced through the seal on the handle that was revealed as Minato let go of the kunai in order to perform a quick sidestep and slam a roundhouse kick at Naruto's right ribs. Naruto grunted as the kick made contact before he slapped his arm down and caught the leg between his body and arm before he spun, putting Minato off balance as he came out of his spin with a viscous backhand that sent the zombie stumbling backwards a few steps. "Come on, that can't really be all you got," Naruto said as he ran at his father's reanimated body and launched a viscous haymaker at its jaw. Minato shifted his head back and allowed the fist to pass harmlessly by even as he let loose with a punch with his right fist. Naruto caught the fist with his left hand, and in a move similar to the one used in the earlier fight between the two Hyugas, used the force from the punch to spin in a circle and slam his elbow into Minato's chest. However, instead of sending Minato flying, Naruto only sent him back a step, which was just fine as Naruto dropped to a knee to avoid the retaliatory horizontal swing as he performed a leg sweep that was jumped over. Naruto jumped back, avoiding the axe kick that was preceded by a front flip before he landed and shot right back into the fray with a wind-coated hand that was held as a knife edge. Minato's body spun out of the lunge but wound up running right into a kick to the side of the head for his troubles. This kick was augmented by both wind and normal chakra, so sent Minato's corpse flying a good 30 feet away. The clone seemed to recover fairly easily, although when it landed it paused, as if analyzing the situation. Naruto snapped into a ready stance, waiting for round 2 as his opponent's eyes narrowed the barest of millimeters. Then the zombie did something that Naruto wasn't expecting. Minato took out a tri-pronged kunai and stuck it in his mouth before he formed 2 spiraling spheres of chakra in his hands. As the kunai began glowing a solid yellow with a sphere of chakra beginning to surround his opponent, Naruto frowned as he said, "Well, that can't be good." As if to punctuate his statement, Minato rushed at him and shoved his right arm at Naruto's chest. Naruto let out a startled "whoa" as he quickly sidestepped. He wasn't quite fast enough as the rapid movement caused his shirt to flutter a little and Naruto's eyes widened as the spinning orb shredded the hanging cloth to little pieces that went flying. "That's got to be Dad's Rasengan," Naruto thought before his eyes widened even further as he took a quick step back to avoid the follow-up from the left hand. He couldn't avoid the kick that was slammed into his chest that followed though, and he went flying over the roof before he crashed 30 feet away. Naruto hit the ground painfully but was able to turn the land into a backward somersault, leaving him in a crouch as his father blasted across the roof and slammed the Rasengan in his right hand down on Naruto's position in an overhead swing. Naruto quickly rolled to the left so that way he could stay out of the way of the left Rasengan and used a quickly formed wind sword to slash at his father's legs. The clone jumped over the slash though and kicked out with the right leg, catching Naruto squarely in the jaw. Naruto felt his body unwillingly leave the tiled roof that had been less than a millionth second ago firmly under his feet. As it did, Naruto tried to swing his wind sword in an upward arc, hoping to slice his father into halves only for a Rasengan to hit the blade and to send Naruto's form spinning with his head aiming for the other Rasengan. Naruto's eyes widened before the Rasengan hit and his skull exploded in a shower of blood, bone, and gray matter. Then in the next instant, his form erupted in smoke and the pieces of a completely shattered roof tile fell to the floor. Minato's eyes darted to the floor before he was suddenly gone as a spear of multicolored chakra shot past where his chest had been a minute ago. 20 feet behind his former position, Naruto growled as he slapped the underside of his father's right hand away, safely diverting the Rasengan away from him as he said, "You know, you're really starting to piss me off." Naruto's form erupted in a bonfire of multi-colored chakra which slammed into Minato's form and sent him flying. Naruto growled as his special chakra coalesced down his arms into 4-inch wide saw blades that spun in front of his palms. Holding his arms carefully at his sides, Naruto said, "You aren't the only one who knows how to spin your chakra to make offensive jutsu." Minato's corpse didn't say anything. It just picked itself up and recreated its 2 Rasengans before it ran back at Naruto, who ran towards his opponent as well. As soon as the two were in range, Minato's right arm swung at Naruto's head. But Naruto was now able to properly defend and chakra sparks flew through the air as his left arm arched up and his spinning chakra disc intercepted the Rasengan. As Naruto blocked the first attack, he initiated the second by bringing his right arm up from down low at an angle, hoping to cut his father's left hand off. The disc danced off a descending sphere, but his rising foot coated in wind chakra did manage to slice through the area right above his father's right foot. Minato began falling to the side and Naruto flicked his right elbow up, hoping to get a good hit in on Minato's chest as he went down before his eyes widened, and he suddenly took a leap back as far as he could as a pillar of flame suddenly slammed down from the top of the barrier into his father's form. He took 5 more hops back before he felt he was safe, and he stared at the fading pillar of flames as his father's form continued to burn even as it seemed to somehow regenerate. All right, it's official. I love that combo. Naruto didn't so much as twitch as his 3 clones suddenly appeared by his side. Instead, he simply said, "Status." First Hokage dealt with via rapid incineration. Chakra usage was minimal. Second Hokage dealt with via 8 killing points technique plus a stab through the brain. This revealed a special seal tag hidden in the brain which controls the corpses. Chakra usage was minimal. Kushina Uzumaki dealt with thanks to help from my brothers. Clone 21 initiated a combination similar to the technique used by Roy Mustang from Rachel's Fullmetal Alchemist manga to ignite the zombie, and used a Wind Demon Windmill Shuriken to increase the blaze. Chakra usage was minimal due to other jutsu being too slow to be effective. Naruto nodded before the 4 suddenly split apart as a still flaming Minato appeared in front of them and tried to light the original on fire as well with a punch. It seemed that even though the clones and original could converse amazingly fast amongst themselves thanks to the slipstream, Minato wasn't interested in allowing the 4 to come up with a proper strategy. Naruto sighed and dismissed his chakra saw blades in order to run through a quick set of hand seals as he said, "I've had enough of this. Wind style. Compress." The air molecules inside a 20-foot cube surrounding the fighters suddenly all shot together, forming a barrier of sorts that usually prevented the trapped person from being able to move properly due to the feeling of being in a plus 30 G environment with all of the air molecules pressing down on you. The effect on Minato was turning his slipstream established speed into something more along the lines of a recently promoted jounin. The compressed air also had the effect of causing the fire to flare as it burned up more oxygen greedily. Knowing that he had to act quickly as the now considerably slower zombie continued running at the original, said Blonde formed a wind sword and said, "Let's finish this." His 3 clones each formed a wind sword as well, and they disappeared using their wind manipulation skills to pass through the condensed air pocket unimpeded before they each appeared on a different side of Minato with a wind blade sticking into Minato's head that quickly caught fire. The 4 blondes quickly pulled out the swords but took no action to put out the flames since they could keep them from their hands. Minato's corpse finally began to burn without regenerating, and it wasn't long before the astral aspect of the 4th Hokage rose up out of the body. He smiled at them, but before he even had the chance to open his mouth, his eyes widened and he snapped his gaze to just over Naruto's head. Naruto and his clones instantly followed suit but saw nothing but empty air that was quickly returning to its regular density as the original released his now unneeded jutsu. Looking back at Minato, they saw him nod at whatever he was seeing before he turned his gaze to the original. "Naruto, you don't know how proud I am at how you turned out. I wish I could say more, but the Shinigami has come to take me back. He has an interesting deal for you, however. Orochimaru's attempts at gaining immortality are beginning to extremely annoy the Shinigami. If you can put a permanent end to those ambitions, he's willing to release my soul." Read Kill the Snake Freak. Naruto thought before he looked up to the empty air above his head and gave a simple nod. He was going to kill the snake anyway, but this got his father's soul free as well, so he wasn't saying anything. Minato's form faded and Naruto noticed that while he and his clones had been fighting completely focused on taking out their undead opponents, Orochimaru had taken the chance to order his barrier dropped, and he and his guard were currently in the air with the Sound Nin with 6 arms shooting what looked like a spider web out of his mouth at them. Inwardly scolding himself about allowing his focus to slip so badly, Naruto said, "Scatter and go help your brothers defend this village. I'll take care of Orochimaru and his guard by myself." The clones blinked but nodded at the order before they disappeared, flaming swords and all. Time skip. During the Uzumaki/Hokage fights, Orochimaru's grin slipped a little as he saw both the 1st and 2nd Hokage's astral forms appear less than 15 seconds into their fights with the blonde nuisance's clones. He wasn't too worried though, since he knew the brat had extreme speed on his side and wasn't expecting those 2 to be very effective anyway. The other 2 fights were obviously going to last much longer, and Orochimaru was sure that those 2 would get rid of the brat for him. He just wished he could see how poorly that nuisance was doing in those fights. The only thing he could clearly catch from the fights were the occasional glimpse of Kushina's legs, and that was simply because she wasn't moving around the battlefield much. Everything else of her body was nothing more than a multicolored blur that looked more like a fog than a human being. And good luck to anyone trying to follow the fight between the 2 users of the slipstream, although he did not know that was what they were using. The only thing he could see of that fight were the shattered remains of a roof tile, signifying that one of the 2 had for some reason used substitution for their fight. His small grin turned into a frown when 5 streams of fire made their way from the barrier to where Kushina's legs were at impossible to follow speeds. His frown deepened when he saw the streams converge, and the younger Uzumaki's clones all appeared side by side, and one of them used a wind jutsu to turn the resulting bonfire into a white-hot inferno. His frown gained a touch of fear as he saw Kushina's astral form appear and say something to the clones, who each nodded and disappeared. Deciding that he'd rather be alive than die trying to see what happened between the brat and his damn father, while there were 3 more of said brats getting ready to do who knows what, Orochimaru shouted, "Drop the barrier! We're leaving!" His 4 bodyguards turned their heads toward him in confusion but did as instructed. Dropping the inner barriers surrounding them first, the 4 took greatly enhanced chakra jumps back to Orochimaru's position, causing the outside barrier to fall since they were no longer in position. Orochimaru was already in a crouch to jump as the barrier disappeared. All 5 jumped off the roof with massive jumps thanks to nearly overloading the chakra coils in their legs to get the necessary distance needed. The 4 ANBU and 1 Leaf Jounin, who were forced to only watch as they were on the outside of the barrier, launched themselves into their own leaps hoping to intercept them. Kidamaru scoffed at their rising forms before he spat a web of spider silk which caught their pursuers and made them drop like a stone. Orochimaru smirked at their descent before he heard a voice shout, "You're not getting away that easily. Transform!" All 5 Sound Nin's eyes snapped to just in front of them as a 200-foot-tall pillar of smoke erupted in front of them on top of the roof they were just on. 2 massive arms shot out of the smoke cloud and closed around the group, immediately stopping their angle descent. When the smoke cleared, it revealed those giant arms were attached to an equally giant and extremely pissed-off blonde. "Orochimaru, for your crimes against the village, you will be executed. But before that, I'm going to make you beg for the tortures of hell. And your followers will get the same." The tone of cold fury in Naruto's voice made Orochimaru's guards shiver. But Orochimaru only gave Naruto his sick grin as he said, "Ah, but first you have to find the original, and he is not even in this country at the moment." Confusion quickly made itself known in Naruto's eyes. But before he could ask what the snake was talking about, all 5 bodies burst apart in explosions of blood. Naruto stared at his blood-covered hands for a moment before he snapped back into focus and dropped his transformation. Once back to his usual height, he quickly ran over to the trapped ANBU team and Hayate and proceeded to cut the webbing to ribbons with a wind-enhanced kunai. Once they were free, Naruto reached into his pocket for his earbud radio and turned it on as he placed it in his ear. Turning it to the battle frequency the Leaf Village was currently using, Naruto said, "I sure hope the old man kept his radio with him." Scene change. Block near North Gate. Sarutobi smashed Emma's staff form into the face of a Sand Jounin as she tried to stab him in the back with a kunai. Around him, the original Inoshikacho trio were demonstrating just why they were currently the best team in the village when it came to teamwork, as they helped the defenders beat back the enemy that had breached the gate. As he spun to slam Emma into a Sound Nin's sternum, he heard his radio crackle as his radio was pinged by the war room. Tapping it with a free hand while the other slammed Emma into yet another enemy, he said, "Sarutobi. Sir, Jounin Uzumaki is asking to have a direct line with you. He's saying it's urgent." "Put him through," Sarutobi said as he spun Emma, deflecting a bunch of kunai before he leapt at the Sand Nin who had thrown the kunai and sent him through a building. "Sir, Orochimaru's no longer in the village. In fact, I don't think he has been since the second exam. The one I fought and the 4 guards he had with him were actually some kind of clone I had never seen before. They seemed to have been made out of blood." Sarutobi blinked in surprise as he muttered to himself, "Blood clones. Orochimaru must have been in really bad shape to have to use those." Louder he said, "Blood clones are extremely draining. I would imagine that Orochimaru and these guards of his would have been out of commission for at least a week after making them, since they take about 90% of the person's chakra to make. But from what you told me happened in the forest, it would be the best type of clone to use since it can be slightly modified without dispelling it and can also use most of the jutsu the original can use. That would explain how the clone could move around so easily when I had made the original's upper body practically useless with those 4th-degree burns. That also explains why he used a jutsu seal instead of the hand signs for that jutsu that brought people back to life. Even if this clone took the majority of the user's chakra, I gathered that this one took a lot more chakra than most to use. He probably made the tag before the clone." Sarutobi went stock still as a chill went down his back at his Jounin's words. A Sand Nin saw this and tried to take advantage of it, but ended up getting back-handed in the face as Sarutobi's instincts took over, shaking him out of his thoughts. "Who did he bring back?" Sarutobi asked, dreading the answer. With a mind as twisted as his former students, he could think of a few people that he would have raised, but he hoped to Kami that he was wrong. Orochimaru brought back 4 people. Sarutobi flinched at the cold fury in Naruto's voice. It reminded him of a dormant volcano, one that was waiting for just the right time to unleash its fury and destroy everything around it. He understood why when Naruto continued and said, "He brought back the first and second Hokage, as well as both of my parents." Sarutobi flinched again as he asked, "How are you holding up?" It was obvious the fight was over and Naruto had won it, but he had just had the first and last encounter with his parents that he would actually be able to remember, and that encounter was those 2 being brought back from the dead to fight him. He wondered how Orochimaru summoned Minato, but put that thought on the back burner until he could have the blonde in front of him. "I'll be having a breakdown tomorrow, I'm sure, but for now I'm still in this fight, sir." Sarutobi nodded even though Naruto couldn't see it and said, "Good. I'm expecting a thorough report tomorrow, but for now just help out the rest of the village." "Yes, sir. Talk to you then." The line burst into quick static as Naruto cut the link on his end. Sarutobi brought all of his focus back onto the battle around him. He slammed Emma into a roof, digging the staff in so that way it stayed standing as he let go and began making hand signs to launch a jutsu at a group of enemy nin who were running towards his group when all of the enemy nin's bodies suddenly toppled forward off their legs. All of the leaf nin who saw it happen blinked and then flinched when as one, both halves of the bodies suddenly ignited into roaring flames. A shadow clone appeared next to Sarutobi with a flaming wind sword held in his right hand. Sarutobi kept himself from jumping, having sensed the ambient chakra in the air even as he focused on fighting the enemy in front of him. The clone admired his handiwork for a moment before it suddenly shouted, "Hit the deck!" Immediately after it put action to words and threw himself forward. Trusting in one of their own, all of the leaf nin in the area quickly hit the floor. The reason for the shout became apparent as multiple miniature wind dragons shot down the street below them in a row and tore into the enemy nin on the street before rising to the roofs to do the same there. The clone glanced back over his shoulder and saw 4 of his brothers standing further down the street next to Asuma Sarutobi. As the former member of the 12 Guardian Ninja ran over, the clones disappeared and all of the shinobi who had survived the attack quickly fell to the ground with kunai holes in their skulls. "You all right there, Pops?" Asuma asked as he came beside his father. Sarutobi nodded and said, "I may be old, but I can still hold my own." Asuma gave a nod of his own as all of the leaf shinobi began moving towards the gate where there were still shinobi trying to get through. Scene change. Forest outside the village. Jiraiya looked around the forest before turning to the clone beside him on their perch in one of the tree branches and gave a mock pout as he said, "How come you guys never leave any for me?" He gestured to the view around him, which involved sound and sand nin thrown all over the place, including in the trees. Some were groaning in pain, but most of them were silent. Some even were smoking in certain places with their clothes still on fire. Standing around the bodies were a couple of leaf ninja teams who were sealing the chakra of those still alive and taking forehead protectors from those who weren't. A snort coming from another tree drew the two's attention to where the second clone was leaning against the trunk while standing on another branch. Looking across at their creator's godfather with amusement in his eyes, the clone said, "Because you're so slow, old man. Besides, we left you 50 of them. 50 out of over 1,000. And the other teams took out another 100 of their own." Jiraiya grumbled under his breath, causing the 2 clones to chuckle. They were brought out of their amusement by the distinct sounds of fireworks shooting up in the sky. Trading looks of confusion, the 3 males shot up the trees they were standing in. When they reached the top, they saw multiple red fireworks going off about a quarter mile further in the forest. "That looks like a retreat symbol," the clone next to Jiraiya said. "It is," the other clone said as he pointed to where they could see the main road. Sound and San Nin were limping down the road as fast as they could while avoiding potshot jutsu that were sent after them. The first clone frowned and looked at Jiraiya as he asked, "Should we pursue them?" "No. Let them go. We've got more important things to do now that the fighting's over," Jiraiya said as he turned and headed back to the village main gates. The clones gave one last look at the retreating forces before they followed, knowing that Jiraiya was right. The leaf had defended itself from its enemies. Now it had to heal the wounds that had came from the battle. Namikaze's household 5 hours after invasion. Tsunami watched her distant relative and his partner pack their mission scrolls with a frown as she said, "I don't know what your Hokage is thinking. Sending you 2 and his student on a retrieval mission 5 hours after you were invaded. Common sense says that the enemy may try to make another attack through guerrilla tactics, and your speed could be used to catch them if they do." Normally I would agree, but the old man wants this woman back in the village ASAP. And what the old man wants, the old man gets, Naruto said as he rolled up his last scroll and placed it in its vest pocket. Across the kitchen table, Haku placed one last group of Senbon needles in the storage seal on his right wrist before he walked around and said, "I am ready, Naruto." The blonde nodded before he faced Tsunami and gave her a hug as he said, "You guys stay safe as you travel, all right?" Tsunami nodded and watched as the blonde disappeared and the ice wielder stepped through a mirror of the cold water. Sighing, she thought, it's going to be a lonely 2 days in this household without those two. Maybe we should leave early as well? After all, I doubt the Hokage would mind getting the key copies for this house a couple of days early. Scene change. Main village gate. The two young shinobi appeared in front of the gate beside Jiraiya, who started to walk out of them. Nothing was said as Jiraiya increased the pace from civilian walking to Chunnin speed, with his current minions both easily matching his pace without complaint. 500 yards from the gates, they took to the trees and increased their pace to Jounin speed as they headed towards a carnival town 20 miles from the village where Jiraiya believed they could find a possible hint of his teammates' trail. As they tree-hopped, Naruto frowned as he couldn't help thinking about the invasion they had just gone through and the fights he had taken part in. Remembering his fight with his zombified father, Naruto thought, I wonder if I should ask Pervy Sage to teach me Rasengan. He did say he would teach me some time and to work on spinning my chakra in my hands until he did. Not 2 minutes after thinking that, as if reading his mind, Jiraiya said, Naruto, do you remember that time 2 years ago when I told you to practice shaping your chakra? Blinking at the coincidence, Naruto nodded and said, yeah. Grinning, the bear of a man unsealed an already filled water balloon and tossed it over and said, this is the first stage of learning Rasengan. I think you've outgrown the kid stage of being a shinobi and won't be demolishing any buildings with it, so I can now feel like a responsible adult and begin teaching it to you. Now, for the first stage, you need to spin that water with your chakra so much it literally tears the balloon apart from the inside. Pretty easy, right? Wrong. You need more than just one rotation, and separating your chakra enough to get the minimum number of rotations to shred the inside of the balloon at a speed that won't get you killed on the battlefield takes a lot of focus and control. I'm betting it takes you at least 10 days to actually get to the point where you can do this stage in 2 seconds. Smirking, Naruto said, I'll take that bet. What are the stakes? Jiraiya hummed in thought since he didn't actually expect his godson to take the bet, although when he thought about it, he really should have. Eyes lighting up at the thought he just had, Jiraiya grinned and said, how about this? If you do get to the point of bursting the balloon in 2 seconds within 10 days without clones helping mind you, I'll teach you my hidden shadow possession jutsu. But if you can't do it, you have to teach me how to do that physical transformation of yours. Sound good? Naruto hummed himself as he considered it. It might be hard to meet the deadline without his clones, but considering he already knew how to rotate his chakra in a disc and this was just adding on to it, he could probably make the cut. And the jutsu on the table was a pretty handy one from what Jiraiya had told him about it. The only problem really was what Jiraiya would do with the solid transformation jutsu if he ever learned it. But if he did lose the bet, then he wouldn't be responsible for what the old pervert used it for. Grinning, he said, sounds good to me. Well then you better hop to it. Just make sure you don't hit a tree. You can multitask, right? Jiraiya said with a cheeky grin at the end. Naruto merely flicked a finger at him, sending a small gust of wind that went straight into the pervert's ear, making him jerk, as if he had just been given a wet willy even as he started swirling his chakra in the balloon with his other hand. Scene change. Crater Central. Naruto didn't know who decided that naming the small town they were at Crater Central was a good idea, but he thought they must have been either A, seriously concussed, B, drunk off their ass, or C, smoking 5 different types of weed all mixed together. He was starting to lean towards D, all of the above though, as he looked down into the crater as he and his companions walked down one of the staircases leading down into it. Apparently Haku was having similar thoughts as he looked up from the map of the Land of Fire he had pulled out when Jiraiya told them the name of the town and said, I'm not sure whether I should be confused or grateful that there are no other settlements with the word crater in its name anywhere near this place. Jiraiya snorted in amusement as he said, I'd stick with grateful. Agreed, Naruto said as they reached the bottom of the staircase and melted into the crowd as Jiraiya led them through the streets. 3 minutes later, he noticed his godfather pickpocket a guy who had wandering fingers himself and then put the guy's spoils in the purse of the woman the perk had stolen from and then proceeded to steal the guy's own wallet without even breaking stride as he walked behind him. Smirking in amusement as Jiraiya looked through the guy's wallet before putting it back without taking anything and moving away from the guy, Naruto shook his head and thought, only a spy master. Haku blinked at the sight before he glanced at his partner and said in a low voice, "Does he do that often?" Naruto shrugged in the universal way of "heck if I know," before he snickered as Jiraiya said, "Only when I'm bored, kid." Haku blushed at being caught talking about the Sannin behind his back but snapped back to attention as Jiraiya said, "Ah, here we go, the lucky sevens. These guys should know where to start looking." As the three walked into the gambling hall Jiraiya had brought them to, Naruto said, "Hey Haku, want to see something cool?" Looking at his partner in slight confusion, the ice user shrugged and said, Sure." Grinning, the blonde took out a Rio from his wallet and walked over to one of the small slot machines that were kept at the back and slid it into the slot. Still grinning, he turned around to look at Haku who had followed him and pulled on the lever and the machine started spinning its slots. Closing his eyes, Naruto counted to 10 in his head before he yanked the handle again 3 times without pause before he opened his eyes. Haku's eyes got big as each slot stopped with all 3 sevens on the middle panel and the machine began spewing out its 200-coin jackpot. Enjoying Haku's shocked look, Naruto said, "I probably have the weirdest case of situational luck out there. I can be given a C rank mission and have it turned into an A rank, and I can apparently legally make a casino go bankrupt." Haku blinked as the blonde expertly sealed all of the coins except one into a scroll and then handed the coins to him, walking past the ice user with a friendly clap on the shoulder and moved towards his godfather while pocketing his Rio and ignoring all of the shocked looks of everyone else in the gambling hall who had actually seen the act. Jiraiya himself was chuckling and he ruffled the blonde's hair when he got to his side. Haku blinked again before he sighed and thought, "One of these days I'm finally not going to be surprised by him. I just hope I'm still sane when that day comes." Scene change, 30 miles northeast of the Hidden Leaf Village. Time, 10 p.m. 2 figures made their way through the trees at high jounin speeds. Both were wearing large black cloaks with red clouds that had collars that went all the way up to their noses and straw hats that left nothing but their eyes visible. The taller of the two had what had to be a giant sword on his back that was wrapped in bandages to look like an obscure kind of mummy. These were Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hashigaki, 2 members of Akatsuki, and they were currently on the move under orders. Their destination, the village hidden in the leaves. Their mission, recon and possibly capture. Their target, 1 Naruto Uzumaki. Their travel plans were put on temporary hold though as they saw a figure suddenly appearing from a tree branch 10 yards in front of them. They stopped on the branch in front of the person who looked like someone had melted whole vats of black and white crayons and dipped him in it and what looked like a Venus flytrap on his shoulders. This was Zetsu Akatsuki's spy. Kisame frowned as he looked at the spy and said, "Zetsu, what are you doing here? We haven't even reached the village yet, so you can't be here about a report." The black half of Zetsu frowned as he said, "I'm afraid that new intel has come up in regards to your mission." The white half grinned as he continued, 8 hours ago, during the final exams of the Chunin exams, the Hidden Leaf Village was invaded by the Hidden Sound and Sand Village. Yes, we were aware of Orochimaru's plan to do so thanks to Sasori. We are going to use the chaos from it to slip into the village unhindered. What of it? Itachi asked coolly. Still grinning, the white half said, "Well, things didn't turn out quite as planned. Not only did the invasion fail spectacularly, it was pretty much sent packing by just one shinobi. Naruto Uzumaki, or as he will soon be known the world over, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze." Itachi's eyes widened just slightly as he thought, the news of Naruto's full heritage does not surprise me. But how could he have single-handedly repulsed an invasion of 2 shinobi villages? Kisame though raised an eyebrow as he said, "Oh? So our target is actually the son of the late Yellow Flash HM. Gaining a grin that could be likened to a cat getting the canary, the shark Nin said, "Should be fun fighting him then. I seriously doubt that considering he took on 4 Edo Tensei Kage-level opponents at the same time and won pretty easily. The 1st, 2nd, and 4th Hokage and the Red Death Kushina Uzumaki to be exact. And then there's the fact that he took out somewhere around 80% of the invasion force by himself through use of his shadow clones." The black half said with a bigger frown. "That answers it," Itachi thought with a frown. A Jinchuriki, something almost always classed as an army destroyer when trained right, coupled with access to shadow clones? Any poor fool going up against someone like that should give their soul to whatever god or goddess they believed in because their ass was well and truly that Jinchuriki's new plaything. This complicated things. Even Kisame frowned when he heard that their target had taken on 4 Kage-level opponents at the same time and won. Eyes shifting into full-on shinobi mode, a very rare occurrence for the shark Nin, he said, "So what does leader want us to do?" Latest intel says that shortly after the invasion, Naruto Namikaze left the village with his partner, Haku Momochi, under the command of Jiraiya of the Sannin. We have confirmed them to currently be in Crater Central, where they will be staying for the night. Leader's orders are to track them, but to not engage until the zombie pair rendezvous with you. You are to allow them to engage the Jinchuriki to determine his threat level and attempt capture while you two deal with his traveling companions. Itachi closed his eyes for a moment before he opened them and said, "Very well." Zetsu nodded before his form began sinking into the tree branch he was on. The white half grinned as he said, "Good luck. You're going to need it." As soon as they were gone, Kisame's frown grew as he said, "I can't believe we won't actually get to fight this kid. I mean, he's your target, isn't he?" Itachi allowed a small frown onto his own face now that he was alone with his partner before he sighed and said, "Yes, he is. But something is telling me that I should be thankful for the cannon fodder leader is providing us." Kisame blinked as he said, "Cannon fodder?" Now grinning, he said, "It's unlike you to use such uncouth words, Itachi." Itachi's frown remained as he said, "And yet I feel that is exactly what they will be." Turning to face their new destination, Itachi said, "Come, we are wasting time," and then jumped to the next branch. Kisame frowned again before he quickly leapt after his partner. Scene change, hidden sound base. Orochimaru allowed the smallest hiss of pain to leave his lips as his second-in-command rubbed burn cream over his fourth-degree burns. Fuming to himself at having to be waited on like this, he asked, "What is the progress of our search?" Kabuto wiped his hands on the cloth he had placed on the nearby table and sealed the jar the cream came in as he said, "We have narrowed it down to a group of 5 villages in the Land of Fire. We should know for sure within a few days." "Good. The sooner we find my old teammate, the sooner I will be free of these accursed burns," Orochimaru said while thinking about the person said burns came from, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Just thinking about the blonde brought a sneer to his lips before he frowned as he thought about the blonde. Part of him couldn't help but think about what he could do with that boy's body as his host. The power of the Kyuubi at his disposal, the sheer speed that would allow him to move faster than the human I could ever hope to comprehend. The sheer amount of chakra the boy possessed that would allow him to perform S-rank jutsu for hours non-stop. Unfortunately, these thoughts were merely a pipe dream. The boy had wasted no time completely decimating the revived Kage and his mother that his blood clone had set on him. There was absolutely no way to mark him, and even thinking about possessing him was laughable. However, when he received the memories from his clone, he had noticed something that had given him a glint of hope. When the brat had fought his father, he had not used those thrice-damned tri-pronged kunai, and still won his fight. This meant that the kunai might not have been the key to the fourth jutsu as many had thought, which meant that the jutsu was most likely actually a bloodline effect. If he could just get his hands on a DNA sample of the blonde, he just might be able to replicate it. It really was a shame that the sample of the fourth he had managed to acquire had already been used for the failed Edo Tensei. Frown softening in thought, Orochimaru considered his possible options before he said, "Kabuto, I have a side project I want you to begin working on." Scene change, Crater Central, the next day. Jiraiya, Haku, and Naruto sat around one of the beds of their hotel room with a map of the Land of Fire around them. Jiraiya was drawing a line across it with a pencil as he said, "Thanks to one of my new friends I met yesterday at the Lucky Sevens, we now know where Tsunade's been in the past 3 months. Almost all of the towns she has passed through contain large casinos. Now, her current path suggests that she is heading to Tanzaka-gai. Considering there is a rather large poker tournament taking place there in just over a week's time, I am fairly confident in saying this is where she will be within the next 7 days." "We better get moving then," Haku said, and the other two nodded. Glancing at his godson as he rolled up his map, Jiraiya said, "Naruto, I want you to get us there as quick as possible. We don't know with any accuracy what day Tsunade is going to get there, and I want to start performing sweeps of the city for her as soon as possible." Naruto nodded and walked over to his pack. Slinging it over his shoulders, he waited for his 2 traveling companions to do the same, and then all 3 left the hotel room. As the door closed, a crow that had been sitting on the roof of the building opposite of the hotel blinked before it took off to inform its summoner of the conversation that had taken place. Scene change, Tanzaka-gai 1 hour later. Naruto stood on top of the Gilded Goose, the casino the poker tournament was going to be held, looking over the village. Behind him was a squadron of 12 supercharged shadow clones that had almost all of their creators' chakra reserves in them, as well as equipped with 10 chakra pills each who were being assigned orders. The clones were separated into 4 teams with each of their headbands either red, yellow, blue, or green with a number between 1 to 4 replacing the leaf symbol. I want squads red, yellow, and blue to maintain a thin perimeter chakra barrier around the village. Make it as large as you can without having to resort to using more than one of your chakra pills on the first day. If anyone with shinobi-level chakra comes through, let me know. Squad green, I want you to spread through the village and sweep for any chakra presences that is higher than Chunin level. If you pick any up, triangulate their positions and radio it in. You all should have enough chakra and chakra pills to perform your duties for 2 weeks. Contact me if you do happen to require a chakra infusion. Now scatter. The 12 clones all gave quick salutes before they disappeared into the slipstream and left to perform their tasks. Taking one last look out the village, he joined the slipstream as well and took off to the outskirts to continue working the first stage of the RAIJIN. He was already up to 5 rotations at the same time, but he needed at least 5 more and to work on his speed in creating them. Time skip. 5 days later. Naruto frowned in concentration as he worked to keep the RAIJIN stable inside its balloon for more than 10 seconds. He had managed to finish the first stage of the jutsu on the 4th day, winning his bet with his godfather. The second stage had gone even quicker considering Naruto's rather ridiculously large chakra reserves that had made it rather easy to provide the overwhelming power needed for that stage. Now he was working on containment, something that was obviously needed in this jutsu if one was to take in the sorry state of the particular field Naruto was working in. Naruto lost concentration as his radio crackled and mentally cursed as the RAIJIN in his hand blew up just as spectacularly as the ones before it, causing him to miss what was said over the radio. Sighing, he tapped his radio and said, "This is Alpha. Please repeat that last transmission." His voice came over in a slightly sheepish tone as the clone on the other end said, "This is Yellow 3, we have a situation with the perimeter field. Something has been absorbing the chakra in the northeast section, and just before I lost our ability to scan the area, I picked up 4 very large chakra signatures that are at least low Kage level heading towards the town, with one signature as big as a Jinchuriki's. At the rate they were traveling, ETA to the town is 5 minutes. "Oh, that's not good," Naruto said, mind already flashing to a very secretive group of S-rank missing Nin his godfather had told him he was trying to gather information on last year. Looks like the pervy sage was going to be able to get some intel today. Call it jumping to conclusions, but for ninja traveling together with all of them having that level of chakra reserves left a very little number of possibilities as to their origins. The only question was whether or not this group was planning on using the upcoming tourney to help finance whatever goals their group had, or if they were just going to raise the town and take what they wanted. Frowning, Naruto said, "All units, this is Alpha. Maintain the perimeter as well as you can. Green leader, find Jiraiya and Haku and inform them of what is going on. Yellow 3, I will be with you momentarily. Maintain your position and await my arrival." Naruto waited just long enough for the clones to confirm their orders before he joined the slipstream and rushed towards Yellow 3's position, thinking, "I really hope these guys aren't who I think they might be. It could really throw a wrench in our plans if we had to fight these guys." Scene change. Yellow 3's position. 1,000 feet past Tenzaku Guy's outskirts. Yellow 3 was hidden in one of the few trees that could be found in his section as he waited for his creator. Turning his head to the side when he felt him arrive, he saw him land in the tree branch next to him with a frown on his face. "Any sign of them?" Naruto asked, looking out over the fields that encircled the entire city. Y3 shook his head with a frown on his own face as he said, "I can't sense them anymore, but we should have a visual on them in 3 minutes." Naruto sighed as he said, "They probably immediately picked up on the perimeter barrier as soon as it touched them and are now hiding their presence. They might even be working on coming into the village from another route now. Or maybe even waiting until tonight to enter," G1 said as he and the rest of Green Squad appeared around them with Jiraiya and Haku among their ranks. "Either way, I want to know who these 4 are. Anyone with as high as chakra reserves as these people have should be monitored to the best of your abilities regardless of the situation. Especially if there is more than one of them together," Jiraiya said, taking out his spyglass, which had been sealed the ever-loving hell out of with a complete spy gear seal set on it that all ANBU had on their binoculars, and began sweeping it across the plains. Naruto frowned at the sight of it, promising himself to get a pair of binoculars of his own sometime. He would have gotten them before, but the things were so darn expensive. Oh, not the binoculars themselves, those were easy to get. It was the seals on them that were the problem. You had infrared, night vision, X-ray, chakra vision, and zoom seals all on a small piece of optical equipment, and they all loved to mess with each other. And if you didn't get those seals just right when you applied them, well, let's just say the results weren't pretty. Naruto had seen one jounin try to do it himself, and the poor fool had practically blinded himself and could now only see in black and white. Naruto may have been good with seals, but there was no way he was going to risk that kind of optical damage just to have a spiffy new toy. He'd rather wait for the set that you received as a congratulations for being so hard to kill present that every shinobi got after 30 years of service to the village. Of course, he could requisition a pair through asking the old man, but he didn't want to take advantage of the relationship he had with the old leader just for a new toy. He was brought out of those thoughts by Jiraiya saying, "There they are. 2 o'clock, about a quarter mile out. They're using a variation of the chameleon jutsu to travel down that side road that schemes the outskirts without being seen. Too bad they can't use it to hide their heat signatures though. Damn, that tall one has a lot of chakra. Even with how well he's hiding it, it's still getting picked up on chakra vision. And that thing he's carrying on his back seems to be eating any foreign chakra around it and looks like a long sword. I would bet half my bank account that's Kisame Hashigaki we're dealing with." All of the blondes frowned as the original said, "So chances are very high that's the Akatsuki group we're dealing with, right? After all, you did say last year that you thought he could be a member." Considering I had actually received confirmation on that last month, then yeah, I would say that it is very likely. And it's a pretty good bet that Itachi Uchiha is there as well, since rumor has it he's Kisame's partner now. Jiraiya said with a frown on his face. Taking the spy scope away from his face, his frown grew as he turned to his godson and said, "It's official, kid. You have got the worst luck when it comes to missions sometimes. These guys couldn't have chosen a worse time to show their mugs around here." Snorting, Naruto said, "No arguments from me on the count of luck, but I have to disagree on their timing. It would have been a lot worse if they appeared on the day of the tournament." Point taken. Still, we need to get rid of these guys, preferably without leveling the town behind us in the process. Jiraiya said as he put his spyglass back to his eye and did a quick sweep around the area to see if anyone else was around that could get caught in the crossfire. Normally I would say to just let me make a run at them while I was in the slipstream, but these guys' instincts are probably just as good as Orochimaru's if not better, and that didn't really work out so well when I tried it on him in the Forest of Death. We're going to have to actually engage them. Still, we should be able to minimize collateral damage if we go now. Naruto said as he performed his own scan of the area with his senses while wishing he could let off a chakra pulse, but knowing that would be a rather bad idea considering their opponents. Haku stared at the two with a slack jaw as he said, "You two are crazy. You're talking about taking on 4 S-class shinobi at the same time like you're discussing what type of soda to buy for the week. And not just any shinobi but Kisame Hashigaki, the tailless-tailed beast, and Itachi Uchiha, the man who single-handedly slaughtered his whole clan in one day, leaving no one but his brother alive." Naruto smirked at his partner as he said, "Haku, my friend, you are forgetting just exactly who we are. Pervy Sage here was able to actually survive an encounter with Hanzo the freaking salamander, and not even a week ago I took on 4 undead Kage-level opponents simultaneously and won pretty easily, all things considered. Between the two of us, I think we can handle a few S-class criminals." Jiraiya smirked as well and said, "The brat's right, we'll be fine. Still, you should stay here where it's relatively safe. You're still not at the level that will be required to keep all of your body parts in this kind of fight. We'll take care of these guys and then we'll all go back to doing what we were before these guys decided to show up. Let's go, Naruto. Right? Green Squad, you guys are with us. Form a ring around us and keep these guys from getting out while we deal with them. Only join in to help if I'm otherwise engaged," Naruto said before he grabbed Jiraiya and joined the slipstream with his clones following a second later. Haku sighed and lowered his head in a dejected manner as he said, "Why did I have to get partnered with the crazy one?" Y3 chuckled from his position, causing Haku to become even more depressed. Scene change. A quarter mile away. The 4 members of Akatsuki were making their way to Tenzaka-gai with as much stealth as possible. They had detected the chakra perimeter field as soon as it had touched their skins and so knew that someone in the village was expecting someone to be coming. There was very little chance of the target being them, but considering someone would be checking it out, they had to be somewhere else if they wanted to avoid drawing attention to themselves. 3 of the members of Akatsuki spun around to look at Itachi, who had been walking in the back when the man actually screamed in pain and brought his hands to his eyes a split second before they all felt a virtual tsunami of chakra that was most definitely not one of theirs sweep around them and settle. As Itachi tried to open his now Sharingan-less eyes to see, the 4 Akatsuki were suddenly surrounded by 4 blondes forming a box with the corners 100 feet apart, and another blonde and a white-haired man standing behind Itachi, making the other 3 members' eyes widen as they all thought fast. Naruto stepped away from his godfather as he observed his opponents. Raising an eyebrow at the waterfall headband on the one standing next to a Jashinist, he said, "Since when has the waterfall village produced shinobi that warrant an S rank in the bingo book?" Snorting, Jiraiya said, "That would have been 70 years ago, kid. Which means we've got Kakuzu the Heart Stealer here. Better be a little more careful than usual around him. He stole the village's Earth Grudge Fear Jutsu and is known for ripping out the hearts of his opponents if they use the right element that he needs to have a full set of all of the primary elements." Kakuzu's eyes narrowed as he said, "You are well informed, Jiraiya of the Sannin. Your bounty will provide a great deal of funding for our group." Jiraiya shrugged and said, "Intelligence gathering is what I do. And speaking of your group, care to give me a members list?" Naruto snorted, drawing everyone's attention to him as he said, "So we've got Itachi Uchiha, the man wanted for an extreme case of parricide; Kisame Hashigaki, the man wanted for assassinating the Land of Water's daimyo; Kakuzu, the man the hidden waterfall sent after the Leaf's first Hokage's head 70 years ago, and some emo Jashinist. Going up against Jiraiya of the Sannin and an unofficially ranked double S-class shinobi who is just as fast as the fourth Hokage. Yeah, this fight won't last long at all." "Hey, don't disrespect me, you little punk. I'll sacrifice your ass to Lord Jashin," the Jashinist yelled out at Naruto. Naruto noticed Kakuzu roll his eyes before he said, "Hayden, shut up." The now introduced Hayden turned his head to his partner and said, "Fuck you, Kakuzu." Whatever else was about to be said was cut off as a small wind dragon slammed into the man's body, tearing a huge hole out of it right where his heart and lungs were situated. Hayden blinked before he looked down and saw the rather large hole in his chest before his head shot back up, and he screamed at Naruto, "That hurt, motherfucker. My mother died the day I was born, moron, and it's supposed to hurt. Now why don't you be a good little psychotic murderer and let me cut you to a dozen pieces?" Naruto deadpanned before he was suddenly right in front of Hayden with his foot, kicking the man away from the other three before he disappeared again. Hayden managed to land on his feet only for the blonde to reappear again beside him, pulling on a ninja string that was wrapped around the Jashinist, causing it to tighten and leaving the Jashinist unable to move. Looking out of the corner of his eye, he saw the man's partner not making a move while Jiraiya and the other Akatsuki pair was simply watching as well, caused him to grin as he said, "Looks like you're not very well liked around here. Fuck you. You better untie me or I'll sacrifice you to Lord Jashin," Hayden shouted. Naruto sighed as he said, "Blah, blah, blah. Shut up." The blonde then took off running circles around the guy at a speed that made it look like there was a blurred wall around the evil priest as the blonde began singing, "Ring around the rosy, pockets full of posy, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." The blonde came out of his run on the side opposite of where he had started with a wind sword in his hand. Pushing his other hand against Hayden, he pushed the Jashinist to the ground and cackled as the man literally fell apart into 30 different pieces like a stack of checkers that was knocked over. Kisame began laughing at the sight as Hayden said, "Jashin, damn it, that hurt, you motherfucking piece of shit. Ow." Naruto apparently didn't take well to being called that a second time as he slammed his foot into the priest's nose, shattering it. He started to bend down to pick up the guy's head, but suddenly disappeared as a bolt of lighting passed right where he had been an instant later. He reappeared behind Kakuzu with his flaming right hand stuck inside Kakuzu's body before he ripped it out, revealing he had a heart in his hand before he incinerated it and disappeared again to avoid the tendrils that had shot out of the missing nin's back trying to ensnare him. Reappearing next to his godfather, who still hadn't engaged the other two, he said, "I know I said this fight wouldn't last long, but you would think a couple of S-ranks could defend themselves a little bit better." This earned more shouting from Hayden and a growl from Kakuzu as he ripped his cloak off, exposing his bare back that was covered in animal masks. 3 masks suddenly shot off his back and formed into animals made out of thread, and Naruto rose an eyebrow as he said, "Well, that's new." He then joined the slipstream and reappeared in front of Kakuzu with his foot already in the missing nin's face, kicking him away before he spun in the air and sent a barrage of wind senbon at the masked creatures, causing them to scatter. He disappeared as soon as hit the ground, and all 3 masks were suddenly shredded to dust from the wind jutsu that the blonde unleashed. As this was happening, the other Akatsuki pair made their own move as Kisame's shark skin sword Samahata had eaten most of the chakra that was surrounding the pair, allowing Itachi to activate his Sharingan again and send a small blast of black fire at the Sannin. Jiraiya dodged the black flames only to have to replace himself with a log as a large shark made out of water slammed into where he had just been. As he dodged a regular colored fireball, he saw Naruto standing over Kakuzu's body with the final heart in his hand as the blonde burned it and thought, so much for those two being a problem. He then took out a kunai and channeled earth chakra in it to block Kisame's sword, only to swear as he felt the sword eating the chakra, and he used all of his strength to deflect the blade to the side, causing it to slam into the ground beside his feet as he jumped away. Kisame raised the sword and came after him with it again, only for the blade to once again be stopped by a chakra-infused kunai. Only this chakra was multicolored and condensed to the point that it formed a solid-looking tanto. Kisame only had time to blink in surprise at the small bit of trouble his sword was having eating the denser chakra before he found a foot in his face and a kunai in his sword arm's shoulder. As the shark Nin skidded backwards, G1 ran through hand signs along with his brothers who were standing on either side of him, and as one they shouted, "Wind style! Great breakthrough jutsu!" All 4 clones blasted the shark Nin over 1,000 feet back with winds that made a Category 4 hurricane's winds seem like a gentle breeze. Ending the jutsu, G1 looked over his shoulder and said, "We'll leave Itachi to you and the boss." He then joined the slipstream and shot after Kisame, with his brothers joining him as he jumped and slammed a chakra-infused fist into the temporarily flying missing Nin's stomach, sending him into the ground and forming a slightly impressive 3 feet wide crater. Jiraiya blinked as the original Naruto reappeared next to his side before he pouted as he looked over at his godson and said, "You guys are taking all my fun." Naruto smirked as he brought his hands up in the ram sign and said, "Actually start doing something besides dodging and I might consider letting you help. You were the one who said we should take care of them quickly. Release." The world around them shattered like glass as a visible pulse of chakra shot out of Naruto, and the Itachi in front of them disappeared, while another Itachi on Jiraiya's other side that was revealed quickly turned his Sharingan off to avoid being temporarily blinded a second time by the visible chakra. "Cheeky brat," Jiraiya muttered even as his hair rose up, splitting in 2 with a half over every shoulder, and began spitting out senbon needles made of hair like one of those Gatling guns the daimyo was having installed inside the guard towers of his palace. In response, Itachi used the substitution jutsu to seemingly break apart into a flock of clones, only for him to get a sandaled foot to the face courtesy of Naruto, and was sent flying back before he landed on his back and quickly rolled into a crouch. Getting up from his own crouch, Naruto said, "I've been wondering something, fanboy." He grinned at the vein that twitched on Itachi's face at the nickname as he continued, "What is the real reason you killed off all of your clan? Couldn't have been to just test yourself, since there were quite a few children and even a couple of babies in the group that couldn't even lift a shuriken yet. So what was it? Did your family just annoy you one too many times one day, and you just snapped, or are the rumors I had heard at the time that members of the clan were planning a coup just a little too close to the truth for your comfort?" Itachi's face remained a stoic mask as Naruto asked his question, but Naruto saw the briefest flash of something flicker behind Itachi's eyes, and he said, "Ah, so that's what happened. You know, that really does answer so much. Except for why you decided to torture your brother for the equivalent of 3 days in that genjutsu of yours. I can understand the fact that you couldn't kill the guy but to torture him instead. You know too much, and yet you still do not understand." Itachi replied as his Sharingan made its 3rd appearance and morphed into Mangekyo form, hoping to catch the blonde in its Tsukiyomi as soon as it finished forming. Unfortunately for him, Naruto had caught sight of the red filling his eyes and had already began looking at his chest even as he pushed chakra out of his body to surround the 3 in a field of highly visible chakra within the span of a second. Itachi had to hold back a scream of pain as his Sharingan got a 1-second blast of way too much chakra to see properly before he managed to turn it off. "Damn it, not again," Itachi thought before he heard his target say, "Taijutsu only from this point, pervy sage. I don't want any more of that black fire of his coming out, and I can't guarantee any of your jutsu will work properly with this much chakra in the air." "Very well," Jiraiya said as Itachi opened his eyes again, only to see the blurry form of Jiraiya's fist shooting towards his face at terminal velocity. He shifted his head to the side to avoid it, only to be thrown backwards by an elbow slammed into his stomach courtesy of Naruto. As the 2-leaf shinobi began picking Itachi apart in tandem, Green Squad was having their own fun with Kisame. G2 had already gotten the man's sword away from him by hitting a pressure point in the man's arm with a wind senbon and blasting the sword away with a gale palm jutsu, and now the 4 were just beating the snot out of him while he tried to defend. He was already bruised from head to toe, and the clones had broken each individual bone in his arms, making them completely useless. Now they were taking him apart piece by running kunai over his body as they passed. What made it worse was the fact that the cuts weren't even that deep but were so numerous that he had already lost more than 2 pints of blood so far. G1 drew one last slash across Kisame's back before he slipped out of the slipstream as the shark Nin's eyes finally rolled up to the back of his head, and he fell to the ground like a sack of potatoes. The rest of his squad also reappeared as they looked down at the fallen Nin, and G3 whistled a little as he said, "Tough old bastard, wasn't he?" Tough, but not tough enough, G2 said before he looked over his shoulder and saw the original Naruto drop Itachi to his knees with a kick to the back of one of them. Jiraiya then proceeded to knock the man out with a knife hand to the back of the neck, causing him to finish the fall to the ground. Chuckling, he said, "Looks like the boss is done playing as well." G1 slapped a stasis seal on the man's body and his wound stopped bleeding as G2 and 3 picked up his legs and began dragging the man towards their creator, who was in the process of sealing Itachi inside a stasis scroll while Jiraiya sealed away the black flames that the Uchiha had brought into existence. When they reached the original blonde, they were joined by G4, who was holding the Shark Nin sword inside an air prison, earning raised eyebrows from everybody. Seeing them, he said, "The thing tried to send a spike through my hand when I grabbed it." The original blinked before he grinned and said, "Security system on a sword. Now that's one I haven't heard before." Then he frowned as he looked at Kisame and said, "Okay. We held off killing Itachi since new information shows that he didn't exactly go as batshit insane as we thought when he killed his clan, but why the hell didn't you kill Blue Gill here?" G1 shrugged and said, "We figured Pervy Sage would like the chance to interrogate him before we off the guy. Either him or Ibiki back in the village." Naruto rose an eyebrow before he looked over at Jiraiya. The spymaster shrugged and said, Can't hurt to have him for when I'm done picking Itachi's brain of everything concerning Akatsuki." The Sannin sealed the Shark Nin and his sword into one scroll before he bit his thumb and summoned a toad about twice the size of a non-summon adult. Holding the scroll in front of the toad, he said, "Please give this to Gamatorai to hold on to." The toad croaked in affirmative before its tongue shot out and wrapped around the scroll and brought it back into its mouth before it went back to the summoning realm. Once he was gone, Jiraiya said, "Well, fun's over." Looking over at where Haydn was still cursing worse than 10 sailors all drunk off their asses, he said, "Now what should we do with him? There's no way he's going to know anything important, but I'd rather not leave him there." "Leave that to us," G1 said before he gestured for his brothers to follow him, and he walked over and sealed all of the body parts into a scroll. Sealing Kakuzu's body in another, he said, "I'll take this guy's body to the Hokage. I'm sure the Hunter Corps would love to get their hands on his body. As for Silverback, I think we'll scatter him across the continent." Jiraiya nodded and said, "That will work." G1 nodded and said, "Then we'll see you when we get back tomorrow." He then joined the slipstream and was quickly followed by the rest of Green Squad. Cleanup now done, Naruto and Jiraiya turned towards Y3's position and began walking back. As they walked, Jiraiya chuckled and said, "You know your partner's going to be driven up the wall when we tell him about this, right?" Naruto gained a fox grin as he said, "Absolutely." 10 minutes later, Zetsu's head appeared as it rose from the ground and he frowned as he thought Leader is not going to be happy about this.